Chapter 462. The Law Skill, Countercurrent, combine the law of amplitude and the law of time to increase one's speed to the extreme. The Law Skill, Earth's Wrath, combined the law of amplitude and the law of strength. Its power was shocking and unimaginable. The Law Skill, Heaven's Wrath, combined the law of amplitude, the law of strength, and the law of gravity. Its power was more than 10 times greater than Earth's wrath. It was definitely Lin Feng's greatest trump card so far. He would not use it unless it was necessary. The skills of the 3 laws were comprehended through the fusion of 2 or 3 of the 7 supreme laws. They were much more terrifying than the skills of the laws of an ordinary cultivator of the earth. After all, any single one of the 7 supreme laws was extremely terrifying, not to mention the fusion of 2 or 3 of them. The power was definitely not as simple as 1 plus 1. The power could not be calculated by adding them together. It was not an exaggeration to say that although the 3 law skills were created by Lin Feng, their power was definitely not inferior to the law skills created by those old monsters. They were also not inferior to the law skills that were regarded as heirlooms by the big families. The law skills were divided into 3 grades: low grade, mid grade, and high grade. Lin Feng's 3 law skills were all high grade. The most powerful law skill, Heaven's Wrath, was probably ranked at the top among the many high grade law skills. Once the law of space was integrated into the 3 law skills, their power would increase by several times or even dozens of times. Let's see if I can climb the 4th step of the celestial stairway first. After that, I'll consider the integration of the law of space. Lin Feng made a decision in his heart. The celestial stairway tested pure law, not strength, so he was not in a hurry to integrate the law of space. Even if he integrated the law of space, it would not have any effect on him climbing the celestial stairway. Instead, it would waste a lot of time. His eyes slowly opened, and a solid light flickered in his eyes. This was the external manifestation of a great improvement in strength. The left and right sides of the celestial stairway extended to the end of one's sight. Ordinary disciples would not be able to reach the edge in their lifetime. At this moment, millions of miles away from the center of the celestial stairway, several dignified middle-aged men were on the 4th step of the celestial stairway. One of their feet was on the 5th step of the celestial stairway. Their bodies were leaning forward and the other foot was on tiptoe. They were just a hair's breadth away from leaving the ground and completely stepping onto the 5th step. However, it was just a hair's breadth away from crossing over tens of thousands of years. The distance on the stairway to heaven was negligible, but in terms of nomological comprehension, one was on flat ground while the other was in the sky. The few of them were like statues. It was unknown how many years they had maintained this posture. Moreover, the gap between them was almost negligible. Long Hua, your medicine peak's luck is pretty good this time. It's said that Yen Luo is a first-rate genius, and his talent is comparable to those junior sect masters. I'm afraid that in a few tens of thousands of years, your medicine peak will have another true disciple. The elegant middle-aged man said with a smile. Beside him, a middle-aged man in white robes replied, "Your array formation peak isn't bad either. In terms of talent, that little monster incarnate of the Sea clan isn't any weaker than the Yama." At this time, a burly man with a rough face grinned. "Luckily, my wild battle peak isn't bad either. Although that Yun Zhongzi's cultivation isn't as good as Yen Luo and the rest, that's because he's still young. If he's given some time to grow, I'm sure he'll have a chance to become a true disciple. Comparing carefully, my alchemy peak's El Jueshin Duo Kuan is a little lacking. His talent and cultivation are outstanding, but his character is too arrogant. His temperament still needs to be polished. Only by experiencing more failures can he break through the pressure of failure, and he'll be able to soar to the heavens. But if he sinks into failure, his future achievements will be limited." A noble middle-aged man with a noble aura sighed softly. Hearing this, two middle-aged men laughed bitterly. Are you saying all this on purpose to hurt us? These middle-aged men were the people at the top of the Shuntian sex pyramid. The elegant middle-aged man was the Array Formation Peak Lord, Yen Chao. The white-robed man was the Medicine Peak Lord, Long Hua. The burly man with a rough face was the Wild Battle Peak Lord, Zhang Lai. The noble middle-aged man was the Alchemy Peak Lord, Yi Changtian. The last two middle-aged men were the Smelting Peak Lord, Ji Shin, and the Gatherer Peak Lord, Feng Haoren. Not long after the Fair Maiden Peak Lord, Yun Hua, left, the Cooking Peak Lord went out to handle some matters. As for the City Domain Peak Lord, he was in charge of more matters and rarely returned. Other than that, there was also the Weapon Refining Peak Lord, Xie Xiaofeng. But as the weakest Weapon Refining Peak Lord, he almost never discussed these matters. Even if he felt helpless in his heart, he could only pretend that he didn't hear anything. However, even though Xie Xiaofeng didn't care about these people, there were still people who wanted to find trouble with him. The Shuntian sex Peak Lords seemed to be harmonious, but in reality, they were constantly fighting in the dark. In terms of strength, Xie Xiaofeng was slightly stronger, so they could only look for other ways to regain their face. And the disciples of the Peak Lords were undoubtedly the best weapons. Xie Xiaofeng, you probably don't know, but this time, a genius has appeared in your weapon refining peak. He was in the limelight during the sex assessment, and even Yama and the other three geniuses were overshadowed by him. TSK, I'm actually quite interested in this kid. I heard that Lin Hang almost fought with Elder Hua of your alchemy peak for this kid. The Array Formation Peak Lord, Yen Chao, glanced at the silent Xie Xiaofeng. Aren't you going to go back and take a look? Xie Xiaofeng frowned. He didn't bring the voice transmission jade slip with him because he didn't want to be disturbed when climbing the stairs. He didn't say anything, but the Alchemy Peak Lord, Yi Changtian, couldn't help but say, there is indeed such a thing. Lin Hang told me that this kid is at the limit of the Supreme Realm. His surname is Lin and his name is Feng. He seems to have a good ability to identify talent. Lin Hang cherished this talent and didn't hesitate to make a generous promise. He was the Alchemy Peak Lord, and Xie Xiaofeng was the Alchemy Peak Lord. The two of them were competitors, and their conflict was irreconcilable. Therefore, he didn't give Xie Xiaofeng any face. Limit of the Supreme Realm? Hearing this, the others couldn't help but shake their heads. You guys don't have to be like this. Who knows, maybe this limit of the Supreme Realm kid really does have some extraordinary methods. The Medicine Peak Lord, Long Hua, smiled faintly. The Berserker Peak Lord, Zhang Lai, laughed out loud. Extraordinary methods? A mere limit of the Supreme Realm kid. Even if he has some extraordinary methods, what can he do? This person's personality was domineering, and he was a little impulsive. He never cared about what others thought of him, but he was also very straightforward. Although he had offended many people, there was no lack of friends who would die for him. Hearing this, everyone couldn't help but smile. Obviously, what the Berserker Peak Lord, Zhang Lai, said was exactly what they thought. Maybe Lin Feng really did have a terrifying talent in the art of craftsmanship, but this alone was far from enough to attract their attention. Xie Xiaofeng looked at them indifferently, his eyes as calm as an ancient well. The Medicine Peak Lord, Long Hua, had a smile on his face. Just as he was about to speak, he suddenly stopped. With a flip of his hand, a voice transmission jade slip appeared in his palm. After about 10 breaths of time, he put away the voice transmission jade slip and said with a smile, "Just now, Elder Peng from my Medicine Peak sent a message saying that Yama, Eljueshin Duokan, and the others have climbed the stairway to heaven together. Although they were a little rushed, the result was good. Although they failed to climb the 4th step, they have started again." Speaking of this, he glanced at Xie Xiaofeng. "Oh right, Xie Xiaofeng, the genius from your alchemy peak seems to be fighting with Eljueshin Duokan. He is also preparing to climb the stairway to heaven." Obviously, Elder Peng's message was outdated. However, Elder Peng did not care much about this issue, so he did not pay much attention to it. Yi Changtian, the Peak Master of Alchemy Peak, said with a smile, I was just about to go back and take a look at El Jueshin Duokun. I want to see if he's really a talent. Xie Xiaofeng, do you want to come along? Yi Changtian, don't forget that Lin Feng is only an ultimate honorable. If you ask Xie Xiaofeng to go, aren't you making things difficult for him? Yan Chao added. He seemed to be defending Xie Xiaofeng, but in fact, his words were even more hurtful. The rest of the people looked at Xie Xiaofeng, anticipating his answer. Facing everyone's gazes, Xie Xiaofeng said calmly, Since you are so interested, I, Xie Xiaofeng, will accompany you? His words were understated, as if he did not care at all. Alright, let's go. The Medicine Peak Lord, Long Hua, smiled and suddenly disappeared, leaving only an afterimage on the spot. Almost instantly, everyone disappeared. There was no one on the stairway to heaven, as if nothing had happened. At the center of the stairway to heaven, the people who had been paying attention to Lin Feng saw Lin Feng's closed eyes slowly open, and their hearts trembled. They focused even more on Lin Feng and held their breaths, afraid to make a sound. Is he finally going to move? The inner disciples of Medicine Peak, Alchemy Peak, Battle-Crazed Peak, Fair Maiden Peak, Smelting Peak, Formation Peak, Collection Peak, Cooking Peak, and City Region Peak were all gathered here. Their expressions were complicated and heavy, and they were worried, eager, and praying. Please don't succeed, please don't. They could no longer bear the pressure that Lin Feng brought to them. They could not accept that the inner disciples of Weapon Refining Peak, who was only an ultimate honorable, could defeat all the inner disciples of the 9 main peaks. Among them, Fair Maiden Peak was different from the other 8 main peaks. They did not place too much importance on the result, but were more looking forward to it. Of course, they did not wish for the inner disciples of their main peaks to be defeated by Weapon Refining Peak, but they did not wish for it to happen as strongly as the other main peaks. Will he succeed? The disciples of Weapon Refining Peak were looking forward to this moment, but deep in their hearts they were afraid. Everything had happened too fast, so fast that they felt that it was unreal. Elder Hua. An old voice woke Elder Hua up from his deep concentration. It was an old man with white hair and white eyebrows. Every movement of his carried a strong sense of oppression, and it was extremely terrifying. Elder Hua suppressed the ecstasy in his heart and said respectfully, Great Elder, you're here. Great Elder Yen Tian, the #1 person under Weapon Refining Peak. Even in the entire Shuntian sect, he had a certain amount of authority. Yen Tian nodded slightly and looked at Lin Feng. He said with a hint of excitement, Is it him? Elder Huan nodded and looked at Lin Feng. It's him. He just joined our Weapon Refining Peak today. The heavens have taken pity on us. Our Weapon Refining Peak has suffered for millions of years, and now we have finally welcomed a peerless genius. It can be said that the hard times are over and the good times are coming. Yen Tian sighed and sighed deeply. At this moment, behind the crowd, 7 figures appeared silently. It's so lively. Looks like they've reached a critical moment of climbing the stairway to heaven. The moment they arrived, Medicine Peak leader Long Hua let out a soft "Oh right, which one of you is Lin Feng?" Chapter 463. All 5 of them are on the 3rd step. The Peak Master of Berserker Peak, Zhang Lai, widened his eyes and said in surprise, Although I don't know which one is Lin Feng, I can't deny his strength. The Peak Master of Alchemy Peak Yi Changtian frowned. There must be a mistake. It's good enough for a Peak Sovereign to reach the 1st step. It's hard to find someone who can reach the 2nd step in a million years, let alone someone who has 1 foot on the 3rd step and is enduring the pressure of the 3rd step. Even the sect master wasn't so strong when he was young. It was true that the pressure from the third step of the celestial stairway was negligible to these peak masters. However, they were all experts at the later stage of Earth Stage 5. They were the top existences below Earth Stage 6. Lin Feng, on the other hand, was only at the ultimate sovereign realm. If a ultimate sovereign realm expert could achieve such a feat, it would frighten many people to death. There must be a mistake. Lin Feng isn't among them. The peak master of Potion Peak, Long Hua, said helplessly. Everyone glanced at Xie Xiaofeng and felt that it was a pity. They thought that they could watch a good show, but now it seemed that Lin Feng was smart and didn't embarrass himself. In fact, Xie Xiaofeng agreed with Long Hua and Yi Changtian, but he looked indifferent on the surface. Looking at the 5 people who were climbing the stairway to heaven, he was a little envious. Every single one of them was a rare genius. It had been a long time since the weapon crafting peak had seen such geniuses. This was a huge blow to the weapon crafting peak. If one of them is a genius of my crafting peak. Just as Xie Xiaofeng had this thought, he extinguished it and shook his head with a bitter smile. It's been millions of years, I can't believe I still have such a fantasy in my heart. Letting out a long sigh, Xie Xiaofeng raised his head slightly and inadvertently caught a glimpse of a familiar figure. Why is Horn here? Beside him is Yan Tian. Why is he here? Xie Xiaofeng frowned. Horn was the 8th elder of Weapon Refining Peak, and Yan Tian was the 1st elder of Weapon Refining Peak. The fact that the two of them were here at the same time meant that something was wrong. Could it be? Xie Xiaofeng's eyes lit up. He was about to send a message to Yan Tian, but before he could do anything, he heard a series of gasps. Following the crowd's gaze, they saw an ordinary-looking young man, who was originally last on the 3rd step, suddenly move. Long Hua, Yi Changtian, Zhang Lai, Yen Chao, Ji Shen, and Feng Haoren also looked at the stairway. Their gazes landed on the faint figure. Under everyone's gaze, that figure had a faint smile on his ordinary face. The corners of his mouth curled up into a confident smile. He suddenly straightened his body and landed at the foot of the 2nd step of the celestial stairway. He tiptoed lightly and unstoppably stepped onto the 3rd step of the celestial stairway as if he was stepping onto an ordinary flight of stairs. His posture could not be said to be elegant or noble, but there was an indescribable charm in it. He was like a swan that made people unable to take their eyes off him. The 3rd step of the celestial ladder. Other than the peak masters who were confused, everyone else widened their eyes in shock. He did it, he really did it. They've overtaken him. They've overtaken him again. He's simply a monster. I knew that he would succeed. But how did he succeed? How did he succeed? The originally silent world of the celestial stairway suddenly became chaotic. Most people could not accept the shocking scene in front of them. However, whether they were willing or not, they had to accept it because it was the truth. Yan Luo, El Juexin Duo Kun, Wu Shen, and Yun Zhongzi were also in disbelief. They looked at Lin Feng, who had rushed to the front of them in an instant. Was this guy really a human? One had to know that this was the 3rd step of the celestial stairway, not the 1st and 2nd step. They had experienced the difficulty of the 3rd step of the celestial stairway. Although they had overtaken Lin Feng previously, the gap between them was actually very small. It was precisely because the gap was too small that they felt unsafe and did not dare to relax. They were constantly on tenterhooks and worked hard to widen the gap between them. Who knew that before they could widen the gap, they would be overtaken in the blink of an eye. Moreover, this time, the gap between them was bigger than any of the previous times. At this time, they had not completely straightened their bodies. Their center of gravity was still on the 2nd step of the celestial stairway, and there was still a long way to go before they could reach the 3rd step. Lin Feng had already stepped onto the 3rd step and was qualified to make a dash for the 4th step. Did we lose? Although he was unwilling to accept it, Yan Luo had to admit that he had lost in this invisible contest. He had lost to an ultimate supreme. Wu Shen looked at Lin Feng with a strange expression. Is he really just an ultimate supreme? Yun Zhongzi was also extremely helpless. If all ultimate supreme are so strong, then do we still have a chance to survive? Juexin Duo Kuan's eyes were about to burst into flames. He gritted his teeth and said, damn it, damn it. Perhaps it was because Lin Feng gave him too much pressure, or perhaps it was because he was too anxious to catch up with Lin Feng, or perhaps it was because of various other reasons. In any case, the furious Juexin Duo Kuan suddenly fell down from the third step of the celestial stairway. On the indestructible celestial stairway, his head was bleeding, his nose was bruised, and his face was swollen. He was in a sorry state. Bang! Bang bang bang. Falling down would also cause a chain reaction. Once Juexin Duo Kuan fell, Wu Shen followed closely behind, followed by Yun Zhongzi and Yen Luo. None of the four were spared. This scene was very similar to what Lin Feng had seen when he first arrived. However, this time, they fell even harder and more miserably. The onlookers outside the celestial stairway were dumbfounded. In the end, he is still too young. Although he is much more outstanding than the average person, he is still a little impetuous. Potion Peak Master Long Hua shook his head slightly. It seems that not only Juexin Duo Kuan, but the others also need to be polished before they can truly have the ability to challenge the position of a true disciple. The other Peak Masters were probably thinking the same thing. However, not everyone was so unbearable. Look, wasn't there another person on the third step of the celestial stairway? The gazes of the 7 Peak Masters all fell on the figure who suddenly became lonely. Wasn't it because of him that the 4 of them fell down just now? Congratulations, Long Hua. It seems that this young man is the peerless genius who just joined your Potion Peak, Yen Luo. His reputation is well deserved. Since Yen Luo dares to call himself the #1 genius of Shuntian Prefecture, he naturally has some tricks up his sleeve. It seems that Yen Luo has a high chance of becoming the first genius among the inner and core disciples to become a true disciple. Compared to Juexin Duo Kuan, Wu Shen, and Yun Zhongzi, Yen Luo's reputation as a genius was more influential and persuasive. Hence, the 7 Peak Masters all mistook Lin Feng for Yen Luo. This was because in their eyes, other than Yen Luo, no one else could beat Juexin Duo Kuan and the rest. Although they did not know who Juexin Duo Kuan, Wu Shen, and Yun Zhongzi were, it was obvious that they were one of them. Long Hua was very happy. While he was gratified, he said politely, "You're too kind. Wu Shen, Yun Zhongzi, and the rest of them are not bad either. Furthermore, we can't be sure that this person is Yen Luo. It's too early to congratulate him. Let's wait until the situation is clearer." Long Hua, aren't you being too humble? Yen Luo is the head of the 4 geniuses. Other than him, who else can beat the other 3 geniuses? Do we still need to doubt his identity? Zhang Lai curled his lips and looked at Xie Xiaofeng, who was standing at the side with his hands behind his back. However, although you are happy, it's a pity that Xie Xiaofeng made a wasted trip. I thought that I would be able to see the so-called genius of weapon refining peak. After he said that, the rest of the people could not help but look at Xie Xiaofeng. They finally felt a little comforted. On the other hand, Xie Xiaofeng glanced at them indifferently. This kind of situation often happened. As long as they gathered together, there were very few times when they would not be ridiculed. Hence, he was very calm and did not feel angry at all. Since all of you are so interested in Lin Feng, why not come to Weapon Refining Peak? The door of Weapon Refining Peak is always open to all of you as long as you dare to come. Xie Xiaofeng said indifferently. Yi Changtian did not get along with Xie Xiaofeng. He wanted to make use of this opportunity to embarrass Xie Xiaofeng. However, he did not expect Xie Xiaofeng to take their attack so easily. He even said that there was nothing he could do. "Why wouldn't I dare? Look, Yen Luo seems to be ready to break through to the fourth step. Feng Haoren's words diverted everyone's attention. The third step of the celestial stairway. Lin Feng was not in a hurry to break through to the fourth step of the celestial stairway. From the first 3 steps of the celestial stairway, one could conclude that the pressure on each step would increase by more than 10 times. Just now, the third step of the celestial stairway was already very terrifying. It made him feel as if his bones were about to be crushed. One could imagine how terrifying the pressure on the fourth step of the celestial stairway would be. He had to rest for a while to adjust his body and mental strength to the best state. Only then would he be able to hold on for 10 breaths of time. After a moment of adjustment, he had already recovered to his peak state. He could finally try to break through to the fourth step of the celestial stairway. He slowly raised his head and his gaze fell on the celestial stairway that was half a person's height in front of him. Such a height was nothing to a supreme being. However, coupled with the extremely terrifying pressure, it became an insurmountable moat. He slowly raised his right foot and calmly looked at the fourth step of the celestial stairway. His calmness contained endless determination. Boom! The moment the tip of his foot touched the fourth step of the celestial stairway, a pressure that made one's soul tremble suddenly appeared, causing his body to tremble violently. It was as if his body could collapse under such pressure at any time. Moreover, this terrifying pressure also contained a mysterious pressure that caused others to feel as tiny as an ant or like a speck of dust in the boundless universe. They were unable to arouse the slightest thought of resisting. He was about to be crushed by this oppressive force. I don't have extravagant hopes of immortality. However, my will is only loyal to my own heart. I will never yield to anyone, not even the heavens and the earth. His swaying body miraculously stabilized. His eyes, which were as calm as a secluded forest and valley, contained a determination that made one's heart palpitate. I'm not interested in being a great hero, and I'm definitely not a straw dog that can be slaughtered by anyone. This was Lin Feng's belief, a sincere belief. Under the support of this belief, his bones crackled. His muscles and skin cracked inch by inch. Blood seeped out from every gap, covering the surface of his body and staining his lapel red. However, it still could not shake him. This shocking scene touched the hearts of everyone present. The will that was mixed with calmness made their hearts throb. 1 breath, 2 breaths, 3 breaths, in the silent world of the celestial stairway, time passed so slowly that 10 breaths of time felt as long as a century. Finally, 10 breaths of time had passed. Lin Feng had become a bloodied man. He was a bloodied man without bones and his flesh was badly mangled. Although my willpower can support me to continue, my body has already reached its limit. Lin Feng did not persist any longer. He had achieved the conditions to be promoted to a core disciple. There was no need to continue. If his body was left with an injury that could never be healed, it would not be worth it. He retracted his right foot from the 4th step of the celestial stairway and fell down, landing outside the 1st step of the celestial stairway. However, he did not care about his image at all. Instead, he panted heavily with his eyes half closed. His body was exhausted to the extreme. He had never been so tired before. Whether it was mentally or physically, he was so exhausted. Everyone kept their mouths shut. Their eyes fell on the figure who had remained calm from the beginning. Even when he was climbing the 4th step of the celestial stairway, under the terrifying pressure and the painful torture, he was still so calm. It was as if he did not feel anything at all. It made people feel an inexplicable chill in their hearts. Their eyes became respectful, even if they knew that this young man was a disciple of the weapon refining peak. The spring of the weapon refining peak is here. This thought flashed through the minds of everyone around. It was hard to imagine how high the weapon refining peak would rise with such a genius. Yen Luo, Huashen, and Yun Zhongzi's expressions became more and more complicated. The last trace of fantasy in their minds was mercilessly crushed by reality. They had no choice but to accept a cruel result. They had lost. In this invisible battle, they had lost completely. Eljuashin Du Kuan was even more resentful and jealous. Why was the final victor not him, but a nobody, a peak supreme kid who had appeared out of nowhere? He was unwilling to accept this, and was even more unconvinced. He could lose to anyone but Lin Feng. How good would it be if this kid was a disciple of the weapon refining peak? Xie Xiaofeng's emotionless emotions were stirred up. He looked at Lin Feng with a sigh. Long Hua was full of smiles. The envious gazes of the surrounding peak masters made him feel very refreshed. He turned his head and smiled. Yen Luo, I thought you would need some time to get used to it before you could barely last 10 breaths on the 4th step of the celestial stairway. I didn't expect you to do it now. Very good, you are indeed the most valued genius of the medicine peak. However, as soon as he said this, he felt that something was wrong. He frowned. He could be sure that the gazes of the surrounding disciples were very strange. Outside the first step of the celestial stairway, Lin Feng's calm eyes flashed with a hint of surprise. He immediately shook his head. I'm sorry, you might have mistaken me for someone else. I am Lin Feng, not Yen Luo. P.S. First update. Chapter 464. Peak Master, he is Lin Feng. This is Yama, a disciple of Medicine Peak said weakly. This was a huge mistake. Many disciples of Medicine Peak wanted to cover their faces. They couldn't afford to lose face like this. However, Long Hua was the Peak Master of Medicine Peak, and they didn't dare to cover their faces. Hence, their faces turned pale, and they had the urge to bang their heads against the wall. At the back. Lin Feng, he is Lin Feng? Xie Xiaofeng's eyes widened in surprise. He was just envious of Medicine Peak for having such a talented disciple, but he didn't expect this disciple to become his Weapon Peak's disciple in the blink of an eye. Wasn't this surprise a little too fast? Xie Xiaofeng felt a little dazed. Although he had dreamed of this scene, it seemed a little unreal. The Weapon Refining Peak's Grand Elder Yen Tian and 8th Elder Huan also noticed Xie Xiaofeng and the other peak leaders. The two of them did not know whether to laugh or cry as they transmitted a message to Xie Xiaofeng. Peak leader, this is the new disciple who just joined our Weapon Refining Peak today, Lin Feng. After Yen Tian and Huan's confirmation, Xie Xiaofeng finally confirmed Lin Feng's identity. He shifted his gaze to Lin Feng and released a trace of mental strength to scan him. Not bad, he is indeed at the limit of the supreme stage. He understood. On the other hand, Yi Changtian, Wild Battle Peak's Zhang Lai, Formation Peak's Yen Chao, and the others were silent. They only looked at Long Hua with a strange smile, as if they were watching a good show. Today's incident was beyond their expectations, but Long Hua was undoubtedly the one who lost the most face. At the side, Yama's face was gloomy and bitter. What the hell is this? He was originally innocent, but he was implicated by Long Hua. It wasn't hard to imagine that the disciples of the main peak would inevitably mention him when they discussed this matter in the future. Long Hua's smile froze and his expression changed. Although the people around him didn't dare to speak because of his identity, their strange gazes made him feel like he was on fire. What was the meaning of extreme joy turning to sorrow? This was it. Long Hua had never thought that something like this would happen to him, but it just so happened. Not long ago, he had just commented on Lin Feng and was flattered by the peak leaders. Who would have thought that in the blink of an eye, he would be slapped in the face by reality? However, as an old monster who had lived for tens of millions of years, he remained calm and collected under such an awkward situation. He did not flick his sleeves and leave in anger. Oh, so you're Lin Feng. Long Hua seemed to have just reacted. Not bad, your performance was very good. Lin Feng frowned as a trace of doubt flashed across his eyes. What exactly is this medicine peak master trying to do? From the words of the medicine peak disciple, he knew that this person was the peak master of the medicine peak. He didn't know his name yet, but the medicine peak and the weapon refining peak had nothing to do with each other. But from Long Hua's behavior, when did the medicine peak and the weapon refining peak become so harmonious? Seeing that such a genius had appeared in the weapon crafting peak and was even humiliated because of it, shouldn't Long Hua be furious? Thousands of thoughts flashed across his mind, but Lin Feng's expression did not change. He calmly said, "Thank you. Lin Feng, I can see that you are an extremely outstanding genius. Even though our Shuntian sect is filled with geniuses, it is hard to find someone more outstanding than you. Forgive me for being blunt, but such an outstanding genius like you should not stay in the weapon refining peak. That will only bury your talent." Long Hua looked at Lin Feng indifferently and said unhurriedly, "Come to my medicine peak. I can promise you that I will provide you with the best resources, find you the best teacher, and even give you the position of the chief core disciple. In my medicine peak, you can be said to be under one person and above tens of thousands. I can even help you become a true disciple." His brows were filled with confidence, and there was an aura of disdain for the world. Such generous conditions, other than the medicine peak master Long Hua, how many people in the Shuntian sect would be able to offer? Snatch. The medicine peak master Long Hua actually snatched a genius disciple of the weapon refining peak and did not hesitate to make such a shocking promise. This was definitely a rare big news in the Shuntian sect. When the crowd reacted, they all looked at Long Hua in shock. But when they thought about it, they felt that it was reasonable. Such a genius, if it were not for the fact that the other peak masters did not have the confidence, they would have also made such an irresistible offer. Their eyes were filled with regret and regret. They only hated that their own peak did not have the same background as the medicine peak, and their authority was not as great. They could only watch as such a genius was snatched away by Long Hua. Lamentable, hateful. The surrounding disciples looked at Lin Feng with envy. Some of the disciples who knew the truth of the sex assessment could not wait to replace him. During the sex assessment, the alchemy peak elder Lin Hang had made such a shocking offer to snatch Lin Feng away. And today, the medicine peak master actually raised this offer to snatch Lin Feng away in front of Xie Xiaofeng. To Lin Feng, how great of an honor was this? "Long Hua, you've gone too far," Xie Xiaofeng, who had remained silent from the beginning, coldly said. Who didn't know of Lin Feng's excellence? With Lin Feng, the weapon refining peak had the hope of rising up. Without Lin Feng, the weapon refining peak would lose its only hope and decline forever. How could he give up such a genius? The reason why he did not argue with Long Hua, Zhang Lai, Yan Chao, and Yi Changtian was because he did not know of Lin Feng's excellence. Now that he knew, how could he not do anything? Long Hua said indifferently, "This is a normal competition between the peaks. There is no such thing as fair or unfair. If you are not willing to give up on this kid, you can make the same offer. I won't mind. You can even snatch any disciple from my medicine peak. As long as you have the ability, I will not stop you. But, can you make such an offer?" His voice was calm, but it made people feel that he was extremely domineering and powerful. The number one peak of the Shuntian sect was not as simple as a title. Hearing this, Xie Xiaofeng could not help but shake his head. Long Hua frowned. "Indeed, I can't make such a promise. But there is one thing that you are wrong about. Very wrong." Xie Xiaofeng stared at Long Hua and said calmly. "Deliberately mystifying." Long Hua sneered. His lips curled up in disdain. "I would like to hear more." Xie Xiaofeng said indifferently, "That's right. Your promise is very tempting in the entire Shuntian prefecture. But you have found the wrong person. Continue." Long Hua was interested. Lin Feng does not need a teacher. No one can teach him. Even the headmaster can't teach him. Xie Xiaofeng turned his gaze onto Lin Feng, only to see that Lin Feng's countenance was as calm as ever. It was as though Lin Feng hadn't heard his words. Xie Xiaofeng's eyes flashed with admiration and admiration. Not only that, he doesn't need the position of the chief core disciple, nor does he need your help. If he wanted to, he would become a true disciple sooner or later. He has the ability. Hua. His words shocked everyone present. Even Lin Feng could not help but look at Xie Xiaofeng in surprise. This mysterious peak master's eyesight was really terrifying. That's right, he did not need a teacher. He also had enough confidence to rely on his own efforts to become a core disciple. If he did not even have this confidence, he would not be Lin Feng. You think highly of him? Long Hua shrugged. But what is your basis? His ability to distinguish talent is terrifying. Even you and I are far from it. If you were to teach him, would you be able to? Xie Xiaofeng smiled faintly. Moreover, don't forget that his cultivation is only at the peak of the Supreme Being realm. Perhaps others would suspect that he is hiding his cultivation, but at our level, we can still easily see through his cultivation. For an ultimate Supreme Being to be able to step onto the third step of the celestial stairway and persist on the fourth step for more than 10 breaths, the law he comprehended must be a mixed law. Moreover, it must be an extremely profound and complicated mixed law. Theoretically speaking, his strength should have reached the fourth stage of the Earth realm. Who would teach such a genius? As we all know, any expert who has comprehended a mixed law can only rely on himself to improve unless he is extremely lucky and happens to meet a teacher who has fused the same law. Are you sure you can help Lin Feng find such a teacher? Hiss! Suddenly, there was a sound of people sucking in cold air. The way they looked at Lin Feng suddenly changed. It was as if they were looking at a monster. If what Xie Xiaofeng said was true, then this Lin Feng was too terrifying, wasn't it? Lin Feng touched his nose and could not help but smile bitterly. Xie Xiaofeng praised him too much. Although it was true, he was still a little uncomfortable to say it out loud. Yama, Huashun, and Yun Zhongzi also looked at Lin Feng in shock. Only now did they realize that Lin Feng was more outstanding and terrifying than they had imagined. They had actually been competing with such a monster all this time. We did not lose unjustly. Yama and Huashun sighed in their hearts. However, Yun Zhongzi's fighting spirit was even stronger. Even if you are the #1 genius in the world, I, Yun Zhongzi, will surpass you one day. Long Hua was silent for a moment and then nodded. I can't deny that what you said makes sense. Then, he changed his tone. However, in terms of resources, my medicine peak has an absolute advantage. No one can refute that. Pausing for a moment, a confident smile appeared on his face. Apart from that, the status of my medicine peak disciples and your weapon crafting peak disciples are as different as heaven and earth. Your weapon crafting peak disciples must have suffered quite a bit, right? Obviously, his decision would not be changed by Xie Xiaofeng's few words. Playing to one's strengths and avoiding one's weaknesses was the way to win. Besides, his medicine peak did not have any weaknesses at all. Long Hua, it seems that I have overestimated you. Xie Xiaofeng could not help but shake his head. Do you really think that the problem of resources is a problem? With my strength, if I were to personally take action, would I not be able to provide these resources? As for the other problem, vexation? Haha, which true powerhouse did not walk out of adversity step by step? An easy environment will only lead to the fall of geniuses and become mediocre. The battle of words between the two peak masters caused the surrounding disciples to feel even more excited and excited. However, Long Hua's advantage was broken one by Xie Xiaofeng and finally lost. There was no doubt that Long Hua was more skilled. Long Hua looked deeply at Xie Xiaofeng. Perhaps you are right, but the final choice is in Lin Feng's hands. It should be up to him which peak to choose. You and I have no right to interfere. Although Xie Xiaofeng had been suppressing him in the battle of words, not everyone was so rational. The gap between medicine peak and weapon refining peak was obvious. No amount of words could change all this. This was where Long Hua's confidence came from. Although alchemy peak Elder Lin Hang had failed earlier, it did not mean that he would fail as well. Potion peak was not alchemy peak. He was the peak lord of potion peak, not an elder of alchemy peak. Be it the main peak or their status, there was a fundamental difference. There was a huge gap. That was why Lin Hang had failed, but he did not think that he would fail. Alright, that's how it should be. Unexpectedly, Xie Xiaofeng actually agreed to Long Hua's suggestion. Moreover, he didn't hesitate in the slightest and agreed very readily. The next moment, they all looked at Lin Feng. Ye Changtian, Zhang Lai, Yen Chao and the other peak masters looked at Xie Xiaofeng suspiciously, then turned to look at Lin Feng. Elder Horn, Deacon Qinghe, Luo Shang and the rest clenched their fists nervously. They did not expect this to happen. Yan Luo, Huashun and Yun Zhongzi looked at Lin Feng curiously, anticipating Lin Feng's answer. El Juexin Doken was burning with jealousy. Damn it! The disciples from the other main peaks also looked at Lin Feng. He'll probably choose Potion Peak, right? They subconsciously guessed. Chapter 465. The disciples of Medicine Peak were looking forward to it. They had already seen how terrifying Lin Feng was. Even though Medicine Peak already had a Yama, if Lin Feng was willing to come to Medicine Peak, it would undoubtedly increase the prestige of Medicine Peak. Their Medicine Peak would probably be able to nurture another true disciple. This, to every disciple of Medicine Peak, was a great honor. Furthermore, if Lin Feng chose Medicine Peak, it would naturally mean that in Lin Feng's eyes, Medicine Peak was far more important than Weapon Refining Peak. As long as he isn't stupid, he will definitely choose Medicine Peak. The disciples of Medicine Peak thought. Medicine Peak was publicly acknowledged as the #1 peak in Shuntian sect. The peak leader was extremely powerful and was an extremely skilled alchemist. The resources in the peak were also the most abundant and his status was also the highest. Furthermore, Long Hua had given such a generous promise. They really couldn't think of any reason why Lin Feng would reject. Peak leader. Elder Huaren, Elder Yen Tian, and Deacon Qinghe all looked at Xie Xiaofeng anxiously. Xie Xiaofeng smiled faintly. No worries. This magnanimity was truly admirable. If he only has outstanding talent without the corresponding will and rationality, my weapon refining peak doesn't need such a genius. He had his own considerations in his heart. He did give some promises, but he wouldn't say them out loud. This was because Lin Feng hadn't truly received his recognition yet. In his opinion, only those who passed his test would have the qualifications to be nurtured with everything he had. And the choice in front of him was a test. I hope you won't disappoint me. Xie Xiaofeng had high hopes for Lin Feng. In the silence, Lin Feng glanced at Xie Xiaofeng and Long Hua. Then, he placed his hands on the ground and coughed twice, spitting out a mouthful of blood. Only then did he stand up with difficulty. However, before he could speak, someone spoke first. Wait. This was the voice of Battle Maniac Peak's Zhang Lai. Zhang Lai. Long Hua frowned and looked at Zhang Lai indifferently. Xie Xiaofeng was also a little surprised, but he didn't say anything. Wild Battle Peak's Zhang Lai ignored Long Hua and laughed loudly. Xie Xiaofeng, since you already have Long Hua, you don't mind adding me in, right? His admiring gaze fell on Lin Feng. Kid, I see that you performed well under the pressure of the 4th step of the celestial ladder. How about it? Are you interested in joining our Wild Battle Peak? I can't promise you anything else, but if you agree, I can teach you a secret technique that I obtained during my travels. Secret technique, could it be? Yen Chao, Yi Changtian and the others looked at Zhang Lai in shock. That's right. This is the secret skill that I rely on to survive, triple transformation. Zhang Lai smiled proudly. The moment these words came out, the expressions of the peak leaders turned into one of shock. They sucked in a breath of cold air. Secret technique was a method of using the laws. It was different from the laws in that it could slightly increase one's battle prowess temporarily. Secret techniques were extremely rare, and the entire Shuntian sect only had tens of secret technique. Among them, the most powerful one could only increase one's battle prowess by 30% at the highest level. However, this secret technique of Zhang Lai's was not something that the Shuntian sect had. It was something that he had encountered during his travels. It was said that it was created by a late-stage Earth Stage 8 expert. It could increase one's battle prowess by 100%. In addition, the quality of a secret technique was more important than the quantity. This was because one could only use one secret technique during battle and not two at the same time. Thus, no matter how many secret techniques one cultivated, it would not be of much use. Of course, the effects of a secret technique would be different under different circumstances. Thus, it could not be said that it was completely useless. However, to many young people, rather than spending time on cultivating secret techniques, they would rather spend it on comprehending the laws. After all, the laws were the foundation of increasing one's strength. Unless one's potential was exhausted and could no longer comprehend the laws, they would use other methods to increase their strength. Zhang Lai's secret technique was called the triple transformation. It was known as a top-grade secret technique and was slightly stronger than most of the secret techniques that complete Earth Saint Great Circle cultivators cultivated. The triple transformation, as its name suggested, fused three types of laws together, causing the power of the laws to increase tremendously. It was indescribable. Generally speaking, the most basic requirement to cultivate the triple transformation was that one's cultivation had to be at the high-level Earth Saint realm. In other words, one had to have comprehended three types of laws. This was because only high-level Earth Saints could unleash the full power of the triple transformation. However, other than high-level Earth Saints, there was another type of person who could cultivate the triple transformation. That was an expert who had comprehended a mixture of laws. Of course, if the mixture of laws they comprehended was only a mixture of two types of laws, the power of the technique would be greatly affected. However, if they comprehended three types of laws, they would be able to unleash the full power of the technique. The triple transformation was definitely the most precious secret technique of the Shuntian sect. Even the secret technique that the sect leader had created could not compare to it. All these years, countless people had been drooling over Zhang Lai's triple transformation. However, Zhang Lai had remained silent about it and had never taught it to anyone. Even if others were willing to pay a huge price, he would not be willing to do so. Thus, no one would have expected that he would use the triple transformation as a condition. The Medicine Peak Lord, Long Hua, was also extremely shocked. Zhang Lai, are you sure you want to teach the triple transformation to others? Aren't secret techniques meant to be used in battles and to be taught to others? Zhang Lai laughed out loud. In the past, I did not meet a suitable person. Now that I have met one, I will naturally not hide it. Long Hua stared at Zhang Lai for a long time. Suddenly, he laughed out loud. Ah, good, things are getting more and more interesting. As he spoke, he turned his head to look at Lin Feng. Since Battle Craze Peak is so generous, I, Medicine Peak, will not be stingy. Lin Feng, as long as you are willing to join my Medicine Peak, I can make the decision to bestow upon you a golden body pill that I concocted 10,000 years ago. The golden body pill was concocted using 9 types of rare ingredients: dragon blood, 7-leaf lotus seed, yutong tree core, limitless water, and so on. In order to concoct the golden body pill, the alchemist's grade must be at least Earth grade high tier. Furthermore, it would take 49 years. During this period of time, the alchemist could not afford to be distracted. Otherwise, all the previous efforts would be wasted. Regardless of whether it was the ingredients, the alchemist, or the amount of time and effort required to concoct the pill, it was extremely demanding. Its value was even comparable to a sixth revolution sacred weapon. It should be known that pills were one-time consumables, while weapons were items that could be used for a long time. However, the value of the golden body pill was comparable to a sixth revolution sacred weapon. One could imagine how terrifying it was. Its effect was very simple. It would allow anyone who consumed it to increase their physical strength to the level of an elite of Earth Stage 5 in an extremely short period of time. Having it was equivalent to having an elite of Earth Stage 5. Crazy. Long Hua and Zhang Lai have both gone crazy. Everyone felt that it was extremely crazy. It was as if the world had been turned upside down. Even Xie Xiaofeng could not help but be moved. These guys did not look like they were trying to poach someone. It looked more like they were trying to compete with their wealth. However, the so-called wealth here was not the traditional meaning of wealth. As if he was influenced by Long Hua and Zhang Lai, Alchemy Peak leader Yi Changtian also spoke. I am not as rich as Alchemy Peak and Battle Craze Peak. However, I do not want to miss out on such a genius. Yi Changtian smiled mysteriously. How about this? I have a fifth revolution sacred weapon, Tiger's Soul Blade. It was given to me by the sect leader after I completed a mission 1,000,000 years ago. As long as you join my Alchemy Peak, I will give you the Tiger's Soul Blade. A fifth revolution sacred weapon given to him personally by the sect leader. Not only did it have great practical value, it also represented a type of glory. It was not inferior to the previous two. The surrounding people were dumbfounded. Crazy, this was too crazy. Could it be that all the peak leaders of Shuntian sect had gone crazy? Long Hua raised his eyebrows but did not say anything. Obviously, now that things had developed to such a stage, it was no longer a simple poaching and snatching. It was an invisible competition between the peak leaders. Cough cough, you guys are too good at causing trouble. If I do not express my gratitude, wouldn't it mean that my array formation peak is too poor to take out anything? Yen Chao pretended to cough and laughed. Coincidentally, I also have a secret technique here. Although it is not as good as Zhang Lai's triple transformations, this secret technique can be used to attack and defend. Furthermore, after mastering it, although there are many formations in the world, 90% of them can be seen through with a single glance. It seems like you guys have already guessed it. That's right, this secret technique is the wordless heavenly formation eye. Ji Shin continued, I can pass on a secret technique to you. Through this secret technique, you can cultivate pure earth fire. It is extremely profound and can be used for refining pills, forging weapons, or even battle. Feng Haoren looked at Long Hua, Zhang Lai and the rest helplessly and sighed. Others could take out 1 or 2 treasures, but he could not. Although he had a fifth revolution sacred weapon, it was his personal weapon. He could not give it to Lin Feng. Thus, after thinking for a long time, he could only give a promise. If you join my gathering peak, I can promise to give you a portion of the resources. You should know that regardless of whether it is the weapon forging peak, gold refining peak, medicine peak or battle crazed peak, most of the resources of Shuntian sect can be said to be provided by my gathering peak. Thus, you will not regret coming to my gathering peak. Alright, before Lin Feng could say anything, he had already captured all the peak masters of the 7 main peaks, not leaving a single one out. Finally, everyone's gaze landed on Xie Xiaofeng, who knew that Xie Xiaofeng did not have any reaction. He did not have any intention of expressing anything. If these things can change his decision, then his will is too weak. What right does such a person have to bear the heavy responsibility of the weapon forging peak? However, if his will is firm and he still chooses my weapon forging peak, I will not mistreat him. Xie Xiaofeng looked at Lin Feng calmly. He did not show any signs of giving any conditions. He had many good things in his hands. However, it would depend on whether Lin Feng had the right to take them. Zhang Lai said with great interest, "Kid, it seems like you have become a hot commodity. We are all interested in you. However, among the 7 main peaks you can only choose one. Now you can tell us your choice." At this moment, the eyes of all the disciples of the main peaks turned red. P.S. Third update. Chapter 466. No one had expected that the situation would develop to this stage. A mere inner disciple, a mere ultimate supreme, had actually triggered an invisible contest that involved the 7 main peak masters. Lin Feng was in the eye of this storm, so his choice would, to a certain extent, determine which peak master would have the upper hand in this invisible contest. Therefore, Lin Feng's attitude was undoubtedly the most important. The disciples of Medicine Peak, who were originally full of confidence, were at a loss and worried at this moment. If Lin Feng only had to choose between Medicine Peak and Weapon Refining Peak, they would definitely not be so worried. However, when Battle-Crazed Peak, Formation Peak, Gathering Peak, and other main peaks joined in, things became chaotic. Furthermore, the things that these peak masters promised were not much worse than Medicine Peaks. This was especially true for Battle-Crazed Peak's peak master, Zhang Lai. His triple transformation was a fatal attraction to Earth elementalists. There was no doubt that this pool of water had been stirred up, and no one dared to guess what Lin Feng would choose. It could only be said that Medicine Peak had the greatest hope, but not by much. Will he still choose our Weapon Refining Peak? Elder Horn's expression was uncertain, and his eyes were full of worry. Obviously, although he had been in contact with Lin Feng the longest, he still did not know Lin Feng well enough and did not have any confidence in Weapon Refining Peak. Including Elder Yen Tian, Deacon Qing He, Luo Shang, and the rest, the elders, deacons, and disciples of Weapon Refining Peak were all very worried. It was not that they did not have confidence in Lin Feng, but they did not have confidence in Weapon Refining Peak. Compared to the other main peaks, Weapon Refining Peak did not have any advantages at all. More importantly, the peak masters of the other main peaks had promised an irresistible treasure. Only Xie Xiaofeng, the peak master of Weapon Refining Peak, was indifferent and had no intention of doing so. They did not know Xie Xiaofeng's plan, so they were naturally resentful towards him. It could be said that if Lin Feng did not choose Weapon Refining Peak, then Xie Xiaofeng, as the peak master, would have to bear a lot of responsibility. Outside the first step of the stairway to heaven, the thin figure became the only focus of the stairway to heaven world. If looks could kill, Lin Feng would have been killed and replaced by countless disciples of the main peak. Lin Feng did not expect that he would become the fuse that ignited the invisible competition between the peak leaders. However, since things had developed to this point, he had no way of interfering. He could only wait and see. It would be a lie to say that he wasn't tempted by the treasures promised by the peak masters. Whether it was the triple transformations, the golden body elixir, or other treasures, he was very envious of them. He wished he could take everything for himself. These peak masters were all filthy rich, which made him very envious. However, he had his own bottom line. If he had to sell his bottom line for good things, then how different would he be from the masses? In the sect assessment, Weapon Refinement Peak was the only peak that was willing to give him a chance. If he were to betray Weapon Refinement Peak after achieving some results, what kind of person would Lin Feng be? What a petty person. Everyone had their own perseverance. Lin Feng wasn't interested in being a hero, but he had a magnanimous heart and followed his own heart when doing things. He did not dwell on it. When everyone's eyes fell on him, he did not hesitate and cupped his fists at the peak leaders. Thank you all for your appreciation. Disciple Lin Feng is humbled. The so-called disciple here was not a disciple between master and disciple, but a disciple of the sect. Although it was the same word, there was a fundamental difference in terms of status. After a pause, he smiled. However, weapon refinement peak focuses on weapon refinement, and I love weapon refinement. Therefore, I choose weapon refinement peak. The last sentence was the main point. The first few sentences were just to set the stage and give the peak leaders a way out. After all, in terms of weapon refinement, Gold Refinement Peak had surpassed Weapon Refinement Peak in all aspects. If Lin Feng really loved weapon refinement, why did he not choose Gold Refinement Peak? No one expected Lin Feng to choose Weapon Refinement Peak. They were stunned and stood rooted to the ground, dumbfounded. The disciples of Medicine Peak were extremely disappointed, and some of them even blamed Lin Feng. After their initial shock, the disciples of Weapon Refinement Peak were elated. Weapon Refinement Peak. Lin Feng had chosen Weapon Refinement Peak. Prior to this, everyone had guessed that Lin Feng would choose Medicine Peak, Gold Refinement Peak, Formation Peak, Battle Crazed Peak, etc. However, no one expected Lin Feng to choose Weapon Refinement Peak. But now, the most impossible outcome had happened. That's great. Elder Yen Tian, Elder Huan, Deacon Qing He, Luo Shang and the others were excited. The disciples of Weapon Refinement Peak were excited, grateful and even prouder. They were proud of their status as disciples of Weapon Refinement Peak. At that moment, the inferiority complex in their hearts was mostly gone. From this day forth, they could hold their heads high and fight with outer peak disciples without cowering. That was because their Weapon Refinement Peak had produced a Lin Feng, a genius that even the peak leaders of the main peaks would fight over. The rest of the disciples of the main peaks were still in a daze. There was only one thought in their minds: is this kid stupid? He actually chose Weapon Refinement Peak. Even the lowest-ranked Qing District Peak is better than Weapon Refinement Peak. They could not understand Lin Feng's thoughts. Long Hua, Zhang Lai and the others looked at Lin Feng in shock. They were a little surprised. Xie Xiaofeng, on the other hand, gave Lin Feng a subtle compliment. If Lin Feng had shown his talent previously, then Lin Feng had shown his unwavering belief. This was the genius that he had been looking for, the genius that could shoulder the responsibility of Weapon Refinement Peak's rise. The ridiculous farce in the stairway world had ended. It ended with the victory of Weapon Refinement Peak. Long Hua, Yi Changtian, Zhang Lai and the others were not unreasonable people. Moreover, in front of so many disciples, they still had to maintain a little of the demeanor and magnanimity of a peak master. Otherwise, they would be seen as a joke by these little fellows. If word of this spread, it would damage their reputation. Therefore, after confirming Lin Feng's choice, they left. Before they left, they all congratulated Xie Xiaofeng. As for whether they were sincere in congratulating him or not, only they themselves knew. The rest of the disciples of the main peaks were all dejected. They were like roosters that had lost a fight. They were no longer interested in staying there, and all went back to their own peak. The disciples of Weapon Refinement Peak excitedly returned to Weapon Refinement Peak and spread the news. This time, Lin Feng had successfully established a great image in the hearts of the disciples of Weapon Refinement Peak. He had become the most respected and revered disciple among the inner disciples. At the peak of Weapon Refinement Peak, the surroundings were filled with clouds and mist. Between the trees, there were only a few meters of trees. It was like a heavenly scene. At the highest point of the mountain, there was a majestic hall. In front of the hall, there was a stone plaque that read, Weapon Refinement Peak. This hall with the name Weapon Refinement Peak was the highest authority of Weapon Refinement Peak. It was also the most sacred place of Weapon Refinement Peak. At this time, Xie Xiaofeng was standing with his hands behind his back. He quietly looked at a skinny youth, and did not speak for a long time. The youth looked at him indifferently. His eyes were calm and not deep. Similarly, he did not say a word. After looking at each other for a long time, Xie Xiaofeng retracted his gaze. His eyes flashed with a trace of admiration. He smiled and said, "Congratulations, you have become a core disciple on your first day in Shuntian sect." "Thank you, sir." The youth's tone was calm. There was not a trace of pride in it. The admiration in Xie Xiaofeng's eyes deepened. He said, "Although I did not promise you anything back then, since you have chosen weapon refinement peak, I cannot be stingy. Otherwise, I will be laughed at by others." As he looked at the youth, he said, "Although my weapon refinement peak has been in decline for millions of years, its foundation is beyond your imagination. There are some things that even Elder Yen Tian does not know about. For example, why has the weapon refinement peak not been abolished for millions of years? For example, why has the Grand Master treated all the other peaks equally and never looked down on the weapon refinement peak? The reason for all these is the foundation of my weapon refinement peak. Millions of years ago, the weapon refinement peak was the #1 peak of the Shuntian sect. The previous weapon refinement peak leader was famous throughout the Blood Mountain continent. His status was comparable to the Grand Master's. The youth listened quietly and did not interrupt. "You are a genius, a very special genius. Therefore, I have been having a headache over what to give you." Xie Xiaofeng said honestly, "After thinking about it, I have finally decided to give you 3 treasures. Or rather, 2 treasures and a chance." Hearing this, a trace of doubt appeared on the youth's calm face. "These 2 treasures and a chance may not be the best, but they are definitely the most suitable for you." Xie Xiaofeng smiled faintly. His words were filled with confidence. "The first treasure is the 1,000 Transformations Illusory Breath Scroll. Within it is an extremely rare secret technique, called the 1,000 Transformations Illusory Breath Scroll. This secret technique does not have the ability to increase one's battle strength, but its value is immeasurable. Even the triple transformation scroll is not a tenth of its value. After mastering this secret technique, one can change one's appearance, change one's aura, and hide one's cultivation level. It is an unparalleled ability to protect one's life. After mastering it, even the strongest peak Earth Saint would not be able to see through it. Terrifying. Finally, a look of shock appeared on the youth's face. Was this the foundation of the weapon refinement peak? It was indeed not a normal level of terror. "It seems like you are satisfied." Xie Xiaofeng smiled faintly. "Your real cultivation level is at the ultimate venerable stage, so this secret technique is very suitable for you. Once you master it, not many people will be able to see through your cultivation level. If you master it, even a peak Earth Saint would not be able to see through it. Next, I will talk about the second treasure, the blood-patterned fruit. It is similar to the golden body elixir in that it can raise the physical body of an Earth cultivation level 5 Earth Saint. However, unlike the golden body elixir, the energy contained in the blood-patterned fruit is extremely violent. It is not as gentle as the golden body elixir. After consuming the blood-patterned fruit, one will have to endure extreme pain. The physical body will break down inch by inch, and the pain will not be inferior to the pain caused by the pressure of the 4th step. Millions of years ago, an elder of the weapon refinement peak consumed the blood-patterned fruit and fainted from the pain. When he woke up, he went crazy and lost his mind. I will give it to you. As for whether you want to consume it or not, it is up to you. Millions of years ago, the elder of the weapon refinement peak was at least a peak Earth Saint. Even such a powerhouse was driven mad by pain. Lin Feng could only imagine how terrifying the pain was. P.S. The first update is here. Begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendation votes. Chapter 467. Although the consequences of consuming the blood-patterned fruit were terrifying, it was undeniable that its value was not low at all. Compared to the golden body elixir, the blood-patterned fruit was still lacking, but it could not be said that it was not valuable. If it was auctioned, many super experts would be willing to pay a huge price to obtain it. 1,000 changes illusory breathing technique, blood-patterned fruit. The crafting peak is indeed rich. Lin Feng was secretly shocked. Xie Xiaofeng did not give Lin Feng too much time to think. He said, "The first two treasures are extremely valuable. However, even if the two of them are added together, they are not as valuable as the third treasure. Or rather, they are not as valuable as this opportunity." Lin Feng raised his head in surprise. "Lin Feng, let me ask you a question. Do you know what is the most important external force for a craftsman?" Xie Xiaofeng was not in a hurry to tell him what the opportunity was. Instead, he asked a question. After thinking for a while, Lin Feng replied, "Fire." It was a simple but firm answer. "That's right, fire." Xie Xiaofeng was very satisfied with Lin Feng's answer. He nodded his head in appreciation and smiled faintly. "The opportunity one mentioned is related to fire." After a pause, his expression gradually became serious, even with a trace of sacred and solemn solemnity. "To be exact, it is not an ordinary fire, but the heart of earthly fire." Heart of earthly fire? Lin Feng was deep in thought. Earthly fire was an extremely powerful fire that was formed naturally between heaven and earth. It was violent and difficult to control. Apart from a few geniuses, only those who had reached the level of a craftsman saint could use earthly fire to temper materials and refine weapons. The heart of earthly fire, as its name suggested, should be the most essential part of earthly fire. As long as one had the heart of earthly fire, one could continuously produce earthly fire that was inexhaustible and would continue to grow. However, most earthly fire had not reached the level of forming the heart of earthly fire. At least, Lin Feng had never heard of or seen it before. The smelting peak had earthly fire, but it did not have the heart of earthly fire. Although the earthly fire in the smelting peak had existed for tens of millions of years, it was continuously produced by the peak master and elders from other places. The value of the heart of earthly fire is immeasurable. Even those at the great perfection earth saint realm rarely possess the heart of earthly fire. Its value is comparable to an 8th revolution saint artifact. To blacksmiths and alchemists, it's even more attractive than a 9th revolution saint artifact. Xie Xiaofeng's voice was solemn, but in the next moment, it turned into pride. "And our crafting peak has the heart of earthly fire." This time, Lin Feng finally lost his cool. He couldn't help but gasp. "Hiss, the heart of earthly fire, the peak, peak, peak. If this news Xie Xiaofeng, the peak earthly peak, 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 it peak, peak alchemist, peak, 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 peak." However, how could a small peak peak possess such a precious item? Xie Xiaofeng's explanation cleared Lin Feng's doubt. Xie Xiaofeng's voice suddenly became serious. "The heart of earthly fire is the most important treasure of our peak peak. Its value is even greater than that of the other 9 peaks combined." Back then, in order to seal and refine the heart of earthly fire, the previous peak master and 10 elders of the peak perished. None of them survived, causing the peak master to decline for millions of years. His voice was bitter. Using millions of years of decline in exchange for the heart of earthly fire. I don't know if this decision was right or wrong. The truth was out. The reason why the peak master and the elders of the peak master fell was all because of the heart of earthly fire. The heart of earthly fire is too precious. Even a full circle earth saint could not resist its charm. If news of this were to spread, it would cause great suffering in the Shuntian sect. Thus, for millions of years, I did not dare to reveal it to anyone. I could only watch as the peak slowly fell from glory to decline. Xie Xiaofeng's tone was very low. His words were not emotional, but the sadness in them could easily affect one's emotions. I have always been waiting for a person who could shoulder the responsibility of the peak. This person must have extraordinary talent and a strong will. Today I have finally waited. Lin Feng, I think you are the person I have been waiting for. Lin Feng felt the pressure on him increase. Sir, you think too highly of me. Whether I think too highly of you or not, we can talk about it in the future. Xie Xiaofeng shook his head slightly and did not explain. Instead, he changed the topic. As I said, I will give you a chance. This chance is the chance to refine the heart of earthly fire. Hearing this, Lin Feng was shocked. His thoughts were in a mess. Wait for me to finish first. Xie Xiaofeng waved his hand. When he saw that Lin Feng had calmed down, he slowly said, The heart of earthly fire of our blacksmith peak has already evolved to a very high level. Furthermore, it possesses a trace of intelligence and knows how to avoid danger. As the saying goes, treasures have spirits and only those who are fated can obtain them. Although the heart of earthly fire has been sealed, no one can refine it. The sect master had personally tried to refine it but failed. I have also tried but failed as well. Thus, I only said that I will give you a chance. Whether you can refine it or not will depend on whether you are fated to do so. Although it was just a chance, this chance was enough to make even a full-circle Earth Saint scramble for it. This was probably the ultimate trump card of the crafting peak. Once this trump card was used, who could compete with them? Looks like it was a wise decision for me to choose the weapon refinery peak. Lin Feng was feeling rather lucky now. He did not expect to get anything when he chose the crafting peak. Unexpectedly, this move of his was the right one. Thank you, Lord, for your generous gift, Lin Feng said. Xie Xiaofeng nodded his head in satisfaction. He flipped his hands and a scroll appeared in his left hand. On his right hand was a blood-colored fruit. He passed it to Lin Feng and said, This is the 1,000 Transformations Illusory Breath Incantation Scroll and the blood-striped fruit. Take them first. As for the heart of earthly fire, you should prepare it first. Come and find me when your physical body has reached Earth LV5. This is because the heart of earthly fire has a high requirement for physical strength. If you are not careful, you might injure your physical body. Earth LV5 is the lowest requirement and also the most basic requirement to refine the heart of earthly fire. At this moment, Lin Feng finally understood why Xie Xiaofeng gave him the blood-striped fruit. Obviously, the blood-striped fruit was specially prepared for the heart of earthly fire. Receiving the 1,000 Transformations Illusory Breath Incantation Scroll and the blood-striped fruit, Lin Feng solemnly put them into his interspatial ring and said, Thank you, Lord. Later, I will send someone to build a small courtyard for you on the mountain peak. After it is done, someone will come to inform you. It will only take 2 to 3 days. Before that, you can stay here temporarily. Xie Xiaofeng waved his hand and changed the topic. All right, I have said what I wanted to say. You can go back now. Lin Feng cupped his hands and said, This disciple will take his leave. Taking 3 steps back, Lin Feng turned and walked out of the hall of the crafting peak. However, his heart could not calm down for a long time. Looking at the thin and steady back, Xie Xiaofeng let out a long breath and murmured, Lin Feng, oh Lin Feng, I hope you will not disappoint me. My crafting peak has waited for too long. Halfway up the mountain, in a secluded and quiet courtyard where the inner court disciples live, Lin Feng took out the scroll and the blood-striped fruit. I have received such great benefits for no reason. It seems that I have to do something for the crafting peak in the future. Otherwise, it will go against my heart. If it was an ordinary thing, he would have rejected it. However, what Xie Xiaofeng gave was exactly what he needed the most at the moment. He could not refuse at all. Therefore, he could only accept this favor and return it in the future. I can postpone the cultivation of the 1,000 Transformations Illusory Breath Incantation and the blood-striped fruit. The most important thing now should be to integrate the law of space. After weighing the pros and cons, Lin Feng decided to integrate the law of space first. He was not clear about the situation in the circle of core disciples for the time being. He planned to improve his strength first so that he would not be helpless if there were any unexpected changes. When I was on the third step of the celestial stairway, I had already grasped the opportunity to integrate the law of space. However, I don't know how long it will take. I hope it won't be too long. Closing his eyes, his consciousness entered Space 1. Lin Feng began to try his best to integrate the law of space. The outside world. News of the celestial stairway world had spread throughout the main peaks and even reached the ears of the core disciples. In this regard, many of the core disciples only took it as a joke and did not take it seriously. Some of them took it seriously but laughed disdainfully and did not take it to heart. Only many of the inner and outer disciples were greatly shocked. Among them, the inner and outer disciples of the weapon refining peak were the most shocked. Now, all the inner and outer disciples of the crafting peak were going crazy with excitement. For so many years, they had been the punching bags for others to vent their anger on. They had been bullied, humiliated, and ostracized. Today, the crafting peak had finally produced such a monstrous genius. Furthermore, he had even suppressed the so-called four geniuses. This kind of behavior was truly satisfying. All the inner and outer disciples were proud that Lin Feng was a disciple of weapon refining peak. The glory and pride that had long been extinguished in their hearts were reignited with Lin Feng's rise. The lifeless weapon refining peak slowly glowed with a trace of vitality. Its spirit and appearance were renewed. At the foot of the mountain, a group of outer disciples was talking loudly about Lin Feng's shocking performance in the celestial stairway world. A young man could not help but laugh foolishly. An outer disciple next to him asked, "Soldier, why are you laughing foolishly?" Cough cough. Nothing, you're mistaken. Huang Wenbing would never admit that he was laughing foolishly. He also did not disclose his relationship with Lin Feng. Although he worshipped Lin Feng and had blind faith in Lin Feng, he also had his own pride. He would never use Lin Feng's name to raise his status. If he really did that, he would be too ashamed to face Lin Feng. Boss, just you wait. Although I can't compare to you, I, Huang Wenbing, am not bad either. It won't be long before I can rely on my own strength to gain everyone's recognition. The gap between him and Lin Feng was getting bigger and bigger. It was like the moon and dust. This made him feel a sense of danger. Looks like I have to work harder. Otherwise, I won't even have the right to follow behind boss. Huang Wenbing took a deep breath and looked unusually serious. Sister-in-law, you should be feeling the same as me right now, right? Boss is too perverted. P.S. The second update is available. Begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendation votes. Chapter 468. The commotion in the outside world did not affect Lin Feng in the slightest. The flow of time in space number 1 was 21,150 times that of the outside world. When the Earth cultivators in the outside world accidentally dozed off, Lin Feng had already been comprehending the laws in space number 1 for several decades. The laws of space have already reached perfection and are the easiest to separate from the power of the mixed laws. What I need to do now is to do the opposite. I'll fuse them the way I separated them. From easy to difficult, countercurrent and Earth's wrath should be relatively easier. Heaven's wrath should be more than 10 times harder than the first two. Then, I'll start with countercurrent. In the boundless land of space number 1, a figure sat quietly with his legs crossed, his body covered in a thick layer of dust. The statue-like figure was motionless. Occasionally, a bright light flashed in his eyes, as if he had comprehended something. The surroundings were filled with an obscure and complicated aura. As time passed, this aura gradually mellowed. No. If this goes on, although I can fuse them, there will always be a gap in the middle. Just a little bit more, but what is this little bit? The figure was either happy or sad, sometimes laughing, sometimes scratching his head in confusion, but his aura was becoming more and more mysterious. The constant time difference resulted in a tremendous change in Linfeng's strength in an extremely short period of time. 3 days in the outside world was more than 170 years in space number 1. It's done. A bright light suddenly flashed in Linfeng's eyes. It was incomparably sharp, like a peerless sword that could pierce the heavens. Countercurrent and Earth's wrath have both successfully fused with the laws of space. I also have a clue about Heaven's wrath. I believe it won't be long before I successfully fuse it. He clenched his fists, and a satisfied smile appeared on his face. The progress is greater than I thought. Although I haven't fused the laws of space with Heaven's wrath yet, my strength has already broken through the late stage of Earth Stage 4 and reached the peak of Earth Stage 5. What a pleasant surprise! The increase in strength after fusing with the laws of space was even more exaggerated than he had imagined. Heaven's wrath, which was originally the most powerful, was now ranked last. His speed and attack had increased by more than 10 times, reaching an astonishing level. Moreover, the 7 supreme laws constantly strengthened his body during this period of time, causing his body to grow rapidly. In particular, when his laws of space reached perfection and his other laws advanced by leaps and bounds, the rate at which his body grew became even more frightening. However, even though his physical body had improved a lot, it still could not keep up with the increase in his strength. Generally speaking, the physical strength of a 5th stage Earth Realm expert would at least reach the 2nd stage Earth Realm. However, Linfeng's physical strength was still lingering around the late stage of the 1st stage Earth Realm. He still needed some time to break through to the 2nd stage Earth Realm. My weakness is defense. In the future, when I fight with others, I must play to my strengths and avoid my weaknesses. I must use my speed to delay the enemy. I must use offense as defense. I must not meet them head-on. Linfeng analyzed his advantages and disadvantages and concluded, also, it would be better if I could get a sacred artifact armor. Of course, a saint-tier armor could not be forced. It would be best if he could get it, but there was no need to be depressed if he could not. Moreover, Linfeng himself was a weapon refiner. Although he was not sure if he could refine a sacred artifact, he was still very confident. Even if he could not refine a 3rd Revolution sacred artifact, refining a 1st Revolution sacred artifact should not be a problem, right? Forget it. I'll try it after I cultivate the illusory breath technique and eat the blood-striped fruit. Linfeng made up his mind and made a decision. The most important thing now was to integrate the law of space into Heaven's wrath and improve his strength. However, just as he was about to continue cultivating, he suddenly stopped and his consciousness abruptly withdrew from Space 1. He opened his eyes, which were shining and as sharp as a knife. No one dared to look into his eyes. Bang, bang, bang. There was a knock on the door. Please come in. He glanced over and saw that it was Elder Horn. Linfeng, did you break through again? Elder Horn asked with a suspicious look on his face. The Linfeng in front of him gave him a very different feeling compared to 3 days ago. There was a faint pressure around his body. He even felt a trace of threat from Linfeng, which was extremely unbelievable. One must know that he was a peak early-stage Earth LV5 expert. He was only 1 step away from the middle-stage Earth LV5 expert. Such strength could be ranked at the top even among the core disciples. Linfeng was startled and said vaguely, sort of. He changed the topic and said, by the way, what's the matter, Elder Horn? Hearing this, Elder Hua and remembered the important matter at hand and said, the Peak Lord sent me to inform you that your new residence has already been built. It's Hao Yu House's number 77 courtyard. The Hao Yu House is located to the south of the main mountain. Once you reach the peak, you'll be able to see it with a single glance. You can live there directly. We have already prepared some daily necessities for you. Thank the Peak Master for me. And thank you, Elder Horn. Lin Feng nodded and thanked him with a smile. There's no need to thank me. You are the hope of our weapon refining peak. No one dares to neglect you. Elder Horn smiled. I won't disturb you. If there's anything, you can find me at the Elder Hall. I'll be there most of the time. Lin Feng nodded. Okay, then I'll take my leave. Goodbye. After Elder Horn left, Lin Feng flew straight to the peak. With his current strength, he could break the shackles of the Suiyang realm and break through the restrictions of flying. Moreover, his speed was extremely fast. In about half an hour, he arrived at the peak of the weapon refining peak. Just as Elder Horn said, the Haoyu House's location was very conspicuous. Moreover, there was a huge plaque made of unknown material in the air to guide the way. Therefore, Lin Feng only used a short amount of time to arrive at the entrance of the Haoyu House. The Haoyu House was a huge group of courtyards. Every courtyard was very elegant. Although the area was not big, it was very classy. The people who lived here were all outer disciples and inner disciples of the weapon refining peak who were promoted to core disciples. Other than the geniuses who were promoted to core disciples through the rank test, the rest of the people were promoted to core disciples through the heaven ascension stairs. Therefore, more than 90% of the core disciples who lived in the Haoyu House were at least Earth Stage 4. Moreover, most of them were at the later stage of Earth Stage 4. There were even a few geniuses who were at the middle stage of Earth Stage 5. They were much stronger than Elder Horn. I'm finally here, the Haoyu House. Lin Feng landed at the entrance of the Haoyu House. With a smile, he slowly approached. After entering the Haoyu House, Lin Feng walked according to the direction of the road sign. After a short while, he arrived at the entrance of another group of courtyards. The number 77 courtyard was located in the middle. The middle courtyard? Interesting. Lin Feng laughed and was about to enter. However, there were blind people everywhere. The Haoyu House was no exception. Before Lin Feng could enter, two figures strode out from the inside and blocked the entrance of the middle courtyard. Both of them were high-level Earth Saints. Their strength was not low. They were at the later stage of Earth Stage 4. Stop. One of them, a youth with short hair and pointy ears, said indifferently, "The middle courtyard is a quiet place. It prohibits all unauthorized people. If you want to enter, you have to report your name and defeat the two of us. Or, you have to refine a sacred weapon of the Fourth Revolution. Otherwise, you have to find another place to live." From his tone, it did not seem like he was deliberately looking for trouble. He did not pester endlessly. It seemed like there really was such a rule. Lin Feng raised his eyebrows. This is the rule of the weapon refining peak? The other youth with long blonde hair said indifferently, "This is not the rule of the weapon refining peak. It is the rule of the Haoyu House." What's the difference? Lin Feng remained calm. The middle courtyard is the center of the Haoyu House. It is a symbol of identity and status. Those who live in it either have great strength or outstanding weapon refining skills. The blonde youth said expressionlessly, "Therefore, the only core disciple of the weapon refining peak, senior brother Nanyang, and the 10 other senior brothers who are ranked in the top 10 have set this rule. Although it is not the rule of the weapon refining peak, everyone has to follow it." Although the weapon refining peak was not as good as the other main peaks, there were still some geniuses occasionally. However, the number and quality of these geniuses were not as good as the other main peak. However, no matter how bad it was, the weapon refining peak was still a main peak. There were still some powerful geniuses that could not be underestimated. Why didn't the Peak Master and Elder Hua tell me about this? Lin Feng could not help but mutter, "Do they really believe that I can defeat these two core disciples who are at the later stage of Earth Stage 4? He could not understand Xie Xiaofeng's thoughts. Was it intentional or not? However, since he was already here, he could not possibly retreat. Moreover, with his strength, it was very easy for him to defeat these two young men. Thus, there was no need for him to hesitate. He said straightforwardly, "All right, let's fight." Hearing this, the two youths were stunned. They looked at Linfeng in shock. With their strength, it was easy for them to see that Linfeng's cultivation was at the peak of supremacy. To be able to reach the peak of supremacy of a core disciple was a very miraculous thing. A core disciple like this could not be promoted by climbing the sky stairs. They could only be promoted by passing the test. Therefore, they subconsciously classified Linfeng as a genius who had no strength but was extremely skilled in weapon refining. With this preconceived impression, they were shocked by Linfeng's ridiculous decision. The short-haired youth smiled faintly. "It seems that you are very confident in your strength. If I tell you that we are both at the later stage of Earth Stage 4, will you still continue?" The blonde youth added with interest. Linfeng's expression did not change. He smiled. "Since I am here, I have no intention of backing down. It just so happens that my strength has made a breakthrough recently. I also want to know if I can contend with a late stage of Earth Stage 4. Such a rare opportunity, why not have a good fight?" Hearing this, the short-haired youth and the blonde youth could not help but secretly shake their heads. They regarded Linfeng as an arrogant person. A peak supremacy actually dared to say that he could contend with a late stage of Earth Stage 4. Was this ignorance or arrogance? It seems that you have made up your mind. There is no way to persuade you. The short-haired youth said indifferently, "Then, let me experience your skills. I hope you won't disappoint me. P.S. Third update. It has been 3 updates for 2 days in a row. Please vote." Chapter 469. Linfeng was looking forward to the upcoming battle with the short-haired, pointy-eared youth and the golden-haired youth. Even though he guessed that his strength had already reached the peak of Earth Stage 5, it was just his own guess. He would only know if his guess was true through the battle. Moreover, even though he had experienced countless battles, he lacked the experience of fighting against a true expert. Therefore, this battle would allow him to understand the battle patterns of experts and enrich his battle experience. 10% of my strength. I will only use 10% of my strength. I hope you can take it. The short-haired youth said faintly. Linfeng smiled, "No need. Just give it your all." The short-haired, pointy-eared youth laughed, arrogant. He shook his head in disdain and threw out a punch without seeing how Linfeng responded. This punch contained the most basic application of the law, the yuan energy of a high-level Earth Saint, and his powerful physique. With these 3 factors combined, although the strength of his attack was not as strong as an Earth Stage 4, it was at the peak of Earth Stage 3. Not to mention a peak sovereign, even an ordinary high-level Earth Saint would be severely injured by this punch. This punch of his was filled with confidence. Seeing that the short-haired youth was still hiding most of his strength, Linfeng's eyes flashed with a trace of helplessness. He could only face this attack head-on. Boom! Linfeng was like a boulder. He did not move an inch, but the short-haired youth was sent flying. The golden-haired youth narrowed his eyes. Earth Stage 4? The short-haired, pointy-eared youth somersaulted in the air and landed steadily on the ground. A trace of blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. He was shocked. "I didn't expect you to be in Earth Stage 4. No wonder you are so confident and arrogant." It was indeed shocking for a peak supreme being to possess the strength of an early stage Earth Stage 4, but the short-haired youth wasn't worried at all. "However, even if you possess the strength of an early stage Earth Stage 4, you're still no match for me. Don't forget that we just said that our strength has reached the late stage Earth Stage 4. The golden-haired youth said faintly, "Leave. You are not our opponent." "Really?" Linfeng chuckled. His power of law suddenly erupted. His body swelled up slightly, and a terrifying aura surged out. "I forgot to tell you that I didn't use my full strength just now. The short-haired, pointy-eared young man had only used 10% of his strength. Wasn't Lin Feng the same? In fact, Lin Feng had even used less of his strength and concealed it even more deeply. The development of the situation was out of the control of the short-haired youth and the golden-haired youth. Feeling the surging aura from Lin Feng's body, the short-haired, sharp-eared young man's expression turned serious. Late Stage Earth Stage 4. The golden-haired young man was also shocked. His relaxed expression slowly turned serious. It seems that we have underestimated you. You are in the late stage of the 4th stage of the Earth realm. You are qualified to be our opponent. Hearing this, Lin Feng roughly estimated his own strength. He had used 20% of his strength, which was equivalent to the strength of a late-stage Earth Stage 4 expert. Therefore, if he used his full strength, he should be equivalent to an early-stage Earth Stage 5 expert, which was similar to his previous guess. However, the spatial pressure of the Suiyang realm was too strong. With his strength of early-stage Earth Stage 5 expert, he still couldn't cause much damage. However, it made sense. Although the Suiyang realm was big, there were countless experts. Earth sages were as numerous as the hairs on a cow, and supremes were endless. If the spatial pressure of the Suiyang realm was slightly weaker, the entire Suiyang realm wouldn't be enough for these people to mess around. It would collapse in a day. It was also because the space of the Suiyang realm was too stable that it could exist for countless years. Very few people could destroy its foundation. Be careful. I'm going to be serious next. The short-haired, sharp-eared youth reminded him. Lin Feng nodded. Come on. Soon, the two of them attacked again. However, this time, the movements were much louder than before. Their punches and kicks created bursts of sonic booms. It was very lively. Ha! Take my move, overturning clouds and rain. The short-haired, sharp-eared youth's fists changed continuously, causing the air to tremble. Wherever it attacked, white fog would swirl, and dense rain of arrows would condense out of thin air and attack from within the fog. Lin Feng's expression didn't change at all. He chuckled lightly and quickly punched forward. The obscure power of space laws was used to perfection, and it couldn't help but increase his strength greatly. What was more terrifying was that the space where his fists passed was slightly distorted to the extent that it could dissolve the rain of arrows. Seeing that the short-haired, sharp-eared youth couldn't defeat him after a long time, the golden-haired youth's expression became more and more serious. After a few breaths, he also joined the battle. Good! Lin Feng wasn't shocked. Instead, he was delighted. Take my move as well. With a flip, he threw a light punch from top to bottom. It looked casual and without any momentum, but the short-haired, sharp-eared youth and the golden-haired youth's expressions changed drastically. This was because they clearly saw the distorted space. The two of them looked at each other. They couldn't care less that Lin Feng was only a supreme. They hurriedly joined hands and threw a punch together. Rumble! A deafening sound came from where the three people's fists collided. Lin Feng didn't budge, but the short-haired, sharp-eared youth and the golden-haired youth retreated again and again. Their feet carried the weight of hundreds of thousands of kilograms, and they didn't stand still until they took a few steps back. The blood in their bodies surged, and they couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of blood. Lin Feng cupped his fists and said, "Thank you for letting me win." After that, he turned and left. The short-haired, sharp-eared youth chased after him. Just as he was about to speak, he was stopped by the golden-haired youth. The golden-haired youth shook his head and said softly, "We are no match for him." Hearing this, the short-haired, sharp-eared youth clenched his fists and finally loosened them. He said dejectedly, "This kid is really a monster. He's only a supreme, but he actually defeated both of us." The short-haired, sharp-eared youth frowned and turned his head to ask, "How strong do you think he is?" The golden-haired youth pondered and said, "From the power of laws he displayed when he fought with us just now, he should have reached the late stage of Earth Tier 4. However, he has rich combat experience and could see through our weaknesses at a glance. This is the reason why he won. As for whether he has hidden his strength or not, I don't know. Hidden his strength? Sun Yu, you think too highly of this kid, don't you think? The short-haired, sharp-eared youth opened his mouth and said in disbelief, "He's a supreme, but he has such terrifying combat experience and the strength of a late-stage Earth Tier 4. He's already quite abnormal. Don't tell me you think his strength has reached Earth Tier 5? A powerhouse of Earth Tier 5, even at the early stage of Earth Tier 5, was an extremely terrifying existence. Moreover, Lin Feng's cultivation was only at the peak of Earth Tier 4. Sun Yu didn't continue to dwell on this issue. Instead, he wiped the blood from the corner of his lips and said, "All right, our mission is completed. We can report to the Peak Master now." There was no cycle of time in the mountains, and no one knew the year after the winter. In the blink of an eye, 10 years had passed since the last sect assessment. In these 10 years, the weapon refining peak had undergone earth-shattering changes. From top to bottom, the weapon refining peak had undergone a complete makeover, especially the inner and outer disciples. Lin Feng's reputation had been completely established. Other than a few disciples who were in closed-door cultivation, almost all the other disciples had heard of Lin Feng. They all regarded Lin Feng as their idol and role model. Due to Lin Feng's appearance, the outer disciples no longer dared to bully the disciples of the weapon refining peak openly. As a result, the disciples of the weapon refining peak had a much better life. Although they weren't on the same level as the other disciples of the main peak, they no longer had to worry about sudden troubles. Therefore, in the eyes of the inner and outer disciples of the weapon refining peak, Lin Feng had become a leader-like figure. However, this situation only existed among the inner and outer disciples for the time being. The core disciples were all arrogant and unruly, and all of them were extremely talented people. Even if they had heard of Lin Feng's achievements, they wouldn't easily acknowledge Lin Feng. Instead, they saw Lin Feng as a competitor. They weren't hostile, but they were still a little unhappy. After all, Lin Feng had done something they couldn't do. Bright Moon House, courtyard number 77. Ever since Lin Feng had entered, the door to the courtyard had never been opened. In the hall, the figure sitting cross-legged on the cushion suddenly opened his eyes. A gleam as sharp as a knife flashed in his eyes. It was as if the entire world was illuminated at that moment. The blood-vein fruit is indeed terrifying. Lin Feng took a deep breath. He still had lingering fears when he thought of the pain that was worse than death after consuming the blood-vein fruit. However, its effects are also surprisingly good. The pain wasn't in vain. In the eyes of others, 10 years was just a short period of time. However, Lin Feng's strength had undergone earth-shattering changes during this period of time. He smiled faintly and murmured, "Middle stage Earth Stage 5 is indeed powerful." Now, he had integrated the law of space into Heaven's wrath, the law of amplitude, the law of space, the law of strength, and the law of gravity. The power of Heaven's wrath had increased by more than 10 times, far surpassing that of Earth's wrath. When he used Heaven's wrath, he could even feel a trace of invisible mysterious pressure. It was very similar to the mysterious pressure that was contained in the mixed law of Heaven's stairway. However, it wasn't as strong. The appearance of the strengthened version of Heaven's wrath had greatly increased his attack power. After consuming the blood-vein fruit, his physical strength had reached the early stage Earth Stage 5, and his defense had also reached a terrifying level. Moreover, the terrifying strength of his physical body had also increased his attack power. Now, even without using any law, his combat power was comparable to an early-stage Earth Stage 5 expert. If the law of space was combined with his physical strength, he would be able to contend with a late-stage Earth Stage 5 expert. Countercurrent was the combination of the law of space, the law of time, and the law of amplitude. It had also increased his speed to a terrifying level. It could be said that Lin Feng had no weaknesses. No matter if it was his attack, defense, or speed, no expert of the same level could gain an advantage over him. Even if he encountered a late-stage Earth Stage 5 expert, such as the peak masters of the various main peaks, or the top few core disciples, Lin Feng was confident that he could compete with them. Of course, the true disciples, the even more terrifying Supreme Elders, and even the sect leader were not people that Lin Feng could compare with for the time being. In the past 10 years, Lin Feng had achieved far more than that. He had also successfully cultivated the 1,000 transformations illusory breathing technique, and it had almost reached the greater mastery realm. Even if he faced a complete Earth Saint, if he didn't check carefully, he wouldn't be able to see through his cultivation. When he had truly cultivated the 1,000 transformations illusory breathing technique to the greater mastery realm, even a complete Earth Saint would be helpless against him. No matter what, the current me can barely protect myself. He would no longer be afraid of peak masters such as Long Hua Yi, Changtian, Zhang Lai, and Yen Chao. He would also no longer be afraid of the strongest core disciples. Chapter 470. After resting for a while, Lin Feng stood up, patted his sleeves, and opened the door. The clear sunlight was less scorching than other places. It was like a spring day, carrying with it a bit of warmth, making people unable to help but feel happy. Before Lin Feng walked out, he saw two people hurrying over. "Junior brother Lin. It's you." Lin Feng looked at the two in surprise and asked, "What's the matter?" These two were the two youths he met when he first came to the Bright Moon House, the short-haired youth, Lu Hu, and the blonde youth, Sun Yu. Although he had fought with them, Lin Feng didn't have a bad impression of them. He was just a little curious. They had nothing to do with him, so why did they come here to see him? Lu Hu looked serious and said in a dignified voice, "We came here to inform you of something. But you have been in seclusion, so we could only wait outside so as not to disturb you." "What's the matter?" "It's very serious. You may be in trouble." Lu Hu and Sun Yu looked at each other, and the former asked seriously, "Before that, I want to ask you what level your strength has reached. This is a very important question, so I hope you can tell us the truth." How could Lin Feng tell the truth about this kind of thing? But seeing the seriousness of the two, he couldn't hide too much. He could only vaguely say, "It should be the 5th stage of the Earth realm." It was indeed the 5th stage of the Earth realm, but he didn't say how much. This wasn't a lie, right? Because Lin Feng didn't say the specifics, Lu Hu and Sun Yu automatically thought that it was the early stage of the 5th stage of the Earth realm. They looked at Lin Feng in surprise. Although they had guessed it before, they didn't have any evidence. Moreover, they didn't dare to believe it. Until now, when they heard Lin Feng admit it, they confirmed it. Therefore, they couldn't help but be surprised. A peak supreme being with the early stage of the 5th stage of the Earth realm was indeed terrifying. They had lived for so many years, but they had never seen such a monster. Lin Feng couldn't stand their gazes, so he helplessly said, "You guys better tell me what happened." Sun Yu muttered, "Early stage of the 5th stage of the Earth realm, maybe there is still hope." "Sun Yu, don't try to comfort Lin Feng. He's at the early stage of the 5th stage of the Earth realm." Lu Hu shook his head. Hearing this, Lin Feng didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "What's the matter? Tell me clearly. Why am I so confused? I don't understand what you mean at all." Lu Hu and Sun Yu were silent for a moment. Finally, Lu Hu said, "Let me do it." Sun Yu didn't say anything, which could be considered a tacit agreement. "Actually, it's very simple. Someone wants to challenge you." Lu Hu stared at Lin Feng with a serious expression and a hint of worry. "And it's a battle of life and death." Lin Feng raised an eyebrow. "Challenge me." "A battle to the death?" Lu Hu nodded solemnly. It is indeed a battle of life and death. The life and death battle was the cruelest and most unconventional arena battle in the Sui-Yang realm. As the name implied, once the life and death battle was accepted, one of the combatants had to die in the end. Otherwise, the life and death battle would continue forever, and no one could stop it. The person who proposed the life and death battle and the person who accepted the life and death battle usually had a deep grudge against each other. It was so serious that it couldn't be resolved. It was a battle of life and death. Sun Yu agreed. That's right. The life and death battle is a battle of life and death. The battle will only end when one of the combatants dies. It can't be. Lin Feng was a little confused. He admitted that he had never done anything outrageous in his life. Even if he had a grudge with someone, he had never forced someone to challenge him to a life and death battle. Moreover, this was the Sui-Yang realm. He had only stayed in the Sui-Yang realm for 10 years, and more than 99% of the time was spent in seclusion. There was no chance for him to offend anyone. He asked, "Do you know who challenged me?" "It's a genius who suddenly appeared in Alchemy Peak. He's the successor of the Earl Jueshin clan, Earl Jueshin Dokkan." After Lu Hu finished speaking, he asked in confusion, "When did you offend him? It seems like he has a deep grudge against you. Otherwise, he wouldn't have proposed a life and death battle." "Earl Jueshin Dokkan?" At the mention of this name, a figure appeared in Lin Feng's mind. Of course, he had seen this person before. Not only had they met, but they had also had a little conflict. However, Lin Feng could not figure out why Earl Jueshin would propose a life and death battle. Could it be that the grudge between them was so deep that it couldn't be resolved? "I only had a little conflict with him in the stairway world." Lin Feng roughly explained what had happened in the stairway world. "Other than that, I don't have much interaction with him. Even during the sect assessment, I didn't say a word to him. I can't figure out why he would propose a life and death battle to me." He was also confused. His good mood was instantly destroyed when someone proposed a life and death battle for no reason. "If that's the case, there's actually no conflict between the two of you. He proposed a life and death battle to you just because of such a small matter?" Sun Yu could not figure it out. No matter how hard he scratched his head, he could not figure out Earl Jueshin Dokkan's intentions. "Forget it. The point now is not to analyze why he wants to challenge you, but how you should deal with it." This was what Lu Hu wanted to say. As soon as Sun Yu mentioned it, Lu Hu said, "It's said that there are 6 top geniuses in this batch of new disciples. They are Yama, the son of Hefu City's city lord Yenen, Erjuexin Dokkan, the heir of the Erjuexin clan, Erjuexin Dokkan, the young master of the Wu clan, Yun Zhongzi, a genius from the vast waves plain, Jing Ting, a genius from the same plane as you, and you. Although your performance 10 years ago was very amazing and even caused a huge commotion, there are not many people who really take you seriously, especially the core disciples. I'm afraid that very few people will take you seriously." Lin Feng shrugged. He could completely guess this situation, but he did not care. "It's said that 10 years ago, after the 4 geniuses lost to you in the heavenly stairway, they reached the 3rd step not long after and lasted for more than 10 breaths on the 4th step. If this was the end of it, it wouldn't be a big deal. The problem is that after they were promoted to core disciples, they were taken away by their respective peak lords and groomed in secret. In the short 10 years since they came to the Shuntian sect, their strength has undergone an earth-shattering change. 8 years ago, Yen Luo defeated an early-stage Earth Stage 5 core disciple with one move. His strength is suspected to be mid-stage Earth Stage 5, or even stronger. Although Wu Shen did not make a move, it is said that he is at least early-stage Earth Stage 5, and is only a step away from mid-stage Earth Stage 5. Yun Zhongzi's improvement was the greatest, using only 10 moves to defeat an early-stage Earth Stage 5 core disciple. As for El Jueshin Duokuan, he is the most flamboyant of them all. He has already seriously injured 3 core disciples of the 5th stage of the Earth realm, and one of them was crippled. Although he is only at the 5th stage of the Earth realm, he has an extremely powerful long saber in his hand. Once the saber is unsheathed, it is accompanied by the roar of a tiger. In just 10 years, they had grown to such a terrifying level. They stood out from the rest of the core disciples and stood out from the rest. One must know that they did not have a cheating device like the first realm. As expected of the peerless geniuses who have the potential to become a core disciple. They are indeed extraordinary. Lin Feng could not help but sigh. But these peak lords are really generous. If they did not invest so much, Yen Luo and the rest would not have improved so much. The 4 geniuses were undoubtedly talented. In the past, they did not receive so many resources to groom them. But now that they were groomed, their terrifying talents could be unleashed. In just 10 years, their achievements were probably greater than what they had achieved in the past thousands or even tens of thousands of years. This was the advantage of a large sect. It was also the reason why these famous geniuses still fought to join a large sect. After all, not every genius could meet a powerful teacher. Sun Yu said in a deep voice, Lin Feng, I suggest that you reject this death match. One could accept the death match, but one could also reject it. However, once one rejected it, it would cause one to lose face and be mocked by others. If it were an ordinary person, they would have rejected it. But Lin Feng was different. He was a core disciple, and a core disciple who was the center of attention. His stunning appearance 10 years ago caused a huge sensation and was seen as a role model by many. If he rejected the death match, the consequences would be unpredictable. However, compared to his life, what was losing face? Even if one's reputation was ruined, it was not as good as being alive. Only by being alive would there be hope in life. We have no right to make a decision for you, but I still want to give you a piece of advice. Don't put yourself in danger because of personal feelings, Lu Hu said solemnly. Lin Feng did not agree or refuse. He smiled and said, I will consider your advice. Without waiting for the two to speak again, Lin Feng changed the topic and asked, By the way, you mentioned the 6 geniuses just now, but you only talked about Yen Luo and the other 3. What about Jing Ting? How is she? Sun Yu looked at Lin Feng with a strange gaze. Her situation is very good, better than what you expected. Lin Feng did not know whether to laugh or cry. Can you be more clear? You two are always like this, saying half and leaving half. Lu Hu laughed and said, Sun Yu, don't keep him in suspense or he will be anxious with you. Cough cough. Sun Yu pretended to cough seriously and looked at Lin Feng enviously. The 6 geniuses' affairs can be said to be full of ups and downs, very bizarre. At that time, no one expected that you would rise up and suppress the other 5 geniuses in one fell swoop, stealing the limelight. Just like at that time, no one expected that Jing Ting, who was ranked last among the 6 geniuses at that time, would surpass you, reverse the situation, and become the leader of the 6 geniuses. Lin Feng, I'm afraid you will never guess that Jing Ting's strength has reached the late stage of Earth Stage 5. The peak master of Fair Maiden Peak, Yun Hua, once said that Jing Ting's strength is no weaker than her. Lin Feng suddenly opened his eyes wide. Jing Ting, late stage of Earth Stage 5, this was simply inconceivable. See, I knew he would have this kind of expression. Lu Hu could not help but laugh. After laughing, he sighed with emotion. She is the hot favorite of all the core disciples to compete for the title of successor disciple. No matter if it is the old masters or the new geniuses, they are all far inferior to her. It can be said that her becoming a successor disciple is already a certainty. Chapter 471. You probably didn't expect Jing Ting to have such terrifying achievements. She is now the goddess of the Shuntian sect. Even us core disciples can't resist her charms. Outstanding talent, perfect looks, gentle temperament, and now she's even more charming. I'm afraid there are very few people who wouldn't be moved by her. Lu Hu said enviously, I don't know what methods you use to make such a goddess fall in love with you. I'm so envious. Speaking of Jing Ting, Lu Hu couldn't help but feel deeply moved. Lin Feng couldn't help but smile. To be able to obtain Jing Ting's love, he was very proud. However, don't be happy too early. A proud daughter of the heavens like Jing Ting can be said to be rare in the world. Ordinary disciples might only dare to stand and watch from afar, but if you were to encounter those successor disciples one day, I'm afraid your situation would be terrible. Lu Hu reminded, the 7 core disciples are all at the 6th stage of the earth stage. Even the strongest core disciples are no match for them. Especially the 6th-ranked core disciple, Lin Rong. He's lustful by nature and daring. The number of girls who have been defiled by him is unknown. It's just that he's too strong, so no one dares to seek revenge. If he sets his eyes on Jing Ting, then it'll be troublesome. Lin Rong? Lin Feng remembered this name. Sun Yu shook his head. Lu Hu, don't scare him. The 7 core disciples are elusive and rarely come back in thousands of years. Even if they come back, they don't know much about the sect. It'll be hard for Miss Jing Ting to meet him. Lu Hu scratched his head awkwardly. I'm just reminding him. I didn't say it'll be like this. No matter what, thank you for your kind intentions. Lin Feng appreciates it. Lin Feng cupped his fists. Sun Yu smiled. Actually, it was the Peak Lord who sent us to tell you. So if you want to thank someone, go thank him. We're just here to run errands. Lu Hu nodded. Also, the Peak Lord said that you're the hope of our crafting peak. Before you grow up, nothing can happen to you. To be honest, this is the first time we've seen the Peak Lord value a disciple so much. When we first heard about this, we were envious for quite a while. After chatting for a while, Sun Yu and Lu Hu bid farewell and left. They had done what Xie Xiaofeng asked them to do. They had told Lin Feng what he needed to tell him and reminded him what he needed to do. They believed that Lin Feng was a smart man. He should know what to do, so there was no need for them to stay. Seeing the two leave, Lin Feng calmed his emotions and frowned. The Shuntian sect's situation is much more complicated than I thought. Of course, the sect's Shuntian. Fortunately, he already had the strength to contend with a super expert of the late stage of Earth Stage 5. He had some confidence in his heart and was not afraid of these troubles. Gold Refining Peak. On a spacious area on the summit, many people were sitting in a circle. In the center of their encirclement, 2 young men were fighting fiercely. Occasionally, deafening rumbles and slight tremors on the ground proved the intensity of the battle. One of them was wielding a saber, while the other was wielding a sword. Every move was filled with power. A moment later, the person controlling the sword was sent flying like a kite with its string cut. He coughed out a mouthful of blood, and when he landed on the ground, he created a deep crater, accompanied by a loud bang. Bang! Just as he was about to get up, his opponent was already in front of him. The tip of the saber stopped at his forehead. You've lost, the saber user said. Hearing this, the defeated youth lowered his head bitterly. I've lost. The spectators did not say a word from beginning to end. They waited until the end of the battle before whispering to each other. Junior brother Duo Kuen's strength has improved again. How terrifying! Rumor has it that junior brother Duo Kuen is only at the early stage of the Earth stage. But no one knows that his true strength is at the middle stage of the Earth stage. Middle stage of the Earth stage and the Tiger Soul saber given to him by the Peak Lord. He's invincible. Even senior brother Fangzhen, the only one at the late stage of the Earth stage, lost. Who can stop him? Even senior brother Fangzhen lost. I think senior brother Liaochen from the Medicine Peak is no match for junior brother Duo Kuen. No wonder he's one of the 4 peerless geniuses who can become a true disciple. I wonder how the other three peerless geniuses are. Can they compare to junior brother duo Koen? In my opinion, it'll be difficult. I'm not sure about Yama, but Yun Zhongzi and Huoshen are definitely no match for junior brother duo Koen. Hey, don't forget that it's the 6 peerless geniuses, not the 4 peerless geniuses. The one from the Fair Maiden Peak is definitely more terrifying than junior brother duo Koen. As for the legendary Linfeng, I'm afraid he's not far behind. As soon as this person said this, he saw El Jueshin duo Koen looking at him. His cold eyes made him shiver. He quickly shut his mouth and lowered his head. He did not dare to mention Linfeng and Jing Ting's names again. Anyone who knew El Jueshin duo Koen knew that he was not allowed to mention Linfeng and Jing Ting in front of him. Otherwise, it would be asking for trouble. El Jueshin duo Koen's gaze stayed on this person for 3 breaths of time. Then, he turned his head and said calmly, Linfeng is just a clown. Sooner or later, he'll become a ghost under my blade. With that, he turned and walked away. Wherever he passed, everyone avoided him. They were afraid that they would not be able to avoid him in time and get cut in half. Only after El Jueshin duo Koen had left for a long time did this core disciple who mentioned Linfeng and Jing Ting finally let out a long sigh of relief. When he came back to his senses, he was covered in cold sweat. He turned his head and looked at the faint figure that was slowly walking away. He swallowed his saliva. Junior brother duo Koen's strength is getting more and more terrifying. The others looked at him gloatingly. He knew El Jueshin duo Koen's taboo, but he still dared to say this. Didn't he deserve it? After a while, El Jueshin duo Koen returned to his courtyard. He took a shower and changed into a clean set of clothes. Then, he sat down and sipped his tea quietly. In his calm eyes, there was a trace of ruthlessness dancing. Linfeng, this time, you're definitely going to die. He looked out of the window. A cold, murderous intent flashed across his eyes. He would never forget the humiliation that Linfeng brought to him. And this humiliation could only be washed away with Linfeng's blood. His hatred for Linfeng had already seeped into his bones. Outsiders only knew that he was strong, but they did not know how much he had suffered and how much pain he had endured. Although it was only a few years, the pain he had endured in these few years was more than the pain he had endured since he was born. Even now, when he thought about it, he still had lingering fears. And all that he had done was to obtain great strength, strength enough to kill Linfeng. Moreover, Linfeng had already become a shadow in his heart. It could also be called the demon in his heart. If he could not kill Linfeng with his own hands, his strength would never reach the peak. He clearly remembered the words of the peak master Yi Changtian. El Jueshin duo Koen, your strength has reached a bottleneck. From now on, no matter how much resources you use, it will be difficult for you to improve. This is because your heart is already in chaos, and the demon has already been born. If you can't get rid of the demon in your heart, your strength will forever remain at this level. At most, you will never surpass Earth Stage 6. Therefore, I have a mission for you. Kill Linfeng. No matter what method you use, you just have to kill him with your own hands. Perhaps the day he dies will be the day you break through to Earth Stage 5. Killing Linfeng was not only his wish, but also the mission that Yi Changtian had given him. This step, if he could cross it, he would be on the path to the sun. If he could not, he would be in the abyss of hell. Crafting Peak, Bright Moon House. Linfeng walked out of the courtyard. Following the direction of the road signs, he arrived at a spacious place. This was an extremely spacious hall. The area was at least tens of thousands of square meters. So lively. After Linfeng entered, he was surprised by the lively scene in front of him. But after thinking for a while, he did not find it strange. That's right. Crafting Peak is the main peak that focuses on crafting. Although not all the disciples in the peak have the talent for crafting, most of them should be crafting geniuses or people who love crafting. He came here mainly to verify his guess. Crafting Pavilion, a place for core disciples to craft weapons. Naturally, it was the most lively place in Bright Moon House. Some people glanced at Lin Feng, but did not take the initiative to greet him. Perhaps they did not recognize that this unfamiliar youth was one of the main characters of the life and death battle, Lin Feng. Crafting weapons was noisy, and Bright Moon House needed to be quiet. In order to avoid disturbing others and causing unnecessary trouble, Lin Feng could only come to the crafting pavilion. This place was located at the edge of Bright Moon House and was blocked by a dense forest. The Peak Lord had specially sent people to open up this place. It was specially built for core disciples to craft weapons. The hall was very lively and even a little noisy. Most of the places were occupied. But strangely, there were a few places that were very spacious, but there was not a single person. It seemed that everyone felt that a spacious place was not good, and it would be more fun to squeeze in. Lin Feng did not think too much about it. He walked to one of the spacious places and stopped. With a wave of his left hand, a set of crafting tools appeared on the ground. A set of 3-line Supreme King level crafting tools. In the eyes of ordinary people, it was already an extremely precious treasure. But in the eyes of these core disciples, this level of crafting tools was clearly not qualified and could not enter their eyes. When Lin Feng took out the crafting tools from his interspatial ring and placed them here, he did not notice that the people nearby who saw this scene were looking at him with a strange gaze. That gaze was very strange. It seemed to be a little surprised, a little sympathetic, a little gloating, and a little sighing. This new kid is going to be unlucky in a while. That is Senior Sister Mo Zhu's exclusive territory. If this hothead knew about Senior Sister Mo Zhu's character and strength, he would probably be scared to tears. Just wait, Senior Sister Mo Zhu just went to look for materials. She will be back in a while. Good luck to this kid. Chapter 472. Mo Zhu was ranked first among the 10 core disciples of Weapon Refining Peak. He was second only to the only chief core disciple of Weapon Refining Peak. He was an advanced Earth Saint whose strength had reached the peak of initial stage Earth Stage 5. He was proficient in weapon refining and was preparing to break through to the Earth rank Weapon Refining Peak. If he succeeded, he would become the 4th Earth rank Weapon Refining Peak. The first 3 were Peak Master Xie Xiaofeng, Great Elder Yen Tian, and Chief Core Disciple Nan Yang. Furthermore, Mo Zhu was very young. It was said that he was less than 100,000 years old. The youth of a human was not measured purely by age. In the Suiyang realm, there was a set of rules. Supremes below 1,000 years old, beginner Earth Saints below 10,000 years old, intermediate Earth Saints below 100,000 years old, advanced Earth Saints below 1 million years old, and complete Earth Saints below 10 million years old were all part of the younger generation. A person's potential was not measured by how strong he was, but by how old he was and what level he had reached. There were rumors that Mo Zhu was less than 100,000 years old, but he had already reached Advanced Earth Saint and had the strength of initial stage Earth Stage 5. He was also preparing to break through to the Earth rank Weapon Refining Peak. Even the only chief core disciple of Weapon Refining Peak, Nan Yang, had not achieved such an achievement when he was less than 100,000 years old. Therefore, some people were discussing privately that Mo Zhu's talent was above Nan Yang's. It was almost certain that he would become the chief core disciple in the future. However, Mo Zhu was very domineering. He would fly into a rage if things did not go his way. No one dared to provoke him. Even Nan Yang chose to avoid him. Lin Feng did not know the secret, so he chose this spacious place. Of course, even if he knew, he would not care too much. This weapon refining pavilion was built for the core disciples to refine weapons. As a member of the core disciples, he naturally had the right to choose any space to refine weapons. He also noticed the strange looks from the people around him, but he did not pay much attention to it. Weapon refining was a job that required concentration and seriousness. Lin Feng took out 9 sets of perfect-grade materials sent over by Elder Horn's men, then started to prepare for the early stage of crafting. He had already familiarized himself with the materials in the first space, so he had an extremely thorough understanding of their properties. In terms of understanding the materials alone, even the peak master Xie Xiaofeng, the Grand Elder Yen Tian, and the chief disciple Nan Yang were nowhere near as good as him. He admitted that he was unable to forge a 4th Revolution Saint artifact for the time being, but he was extremely confident in identifying materials. After finishing his preparations, he lit the stove as if no one else was around. Boom! As soon as the flame in the furnace was ignited, it grew rapidly as if it had absorbed some kind of nutrients. An invisible, scorching aura automatically gathered in the furnace, causing the flame to grow into a violent, scorching flame in just a few breaths. Even though they were separated by the furnace, Lin Feng could still feel the scorching heat, as if even the surrounding air was about to be incinerated. This is earth fire? Lin Feng's eyes flickered with a hint of surprise. It is indeed somewhat magical. Earth fire was a kind of invisible flame that was constantly produced from the depths of the earth. This kind of earth fire would ignite upon contact with fire and quickly devour it, turning it into an open flame that released an extremely high temperature. Others might need to carefully control the earth fire to barely stabilize it. However, Lin Feng was different. The laws he had comprehended were born from the eruptions of a few volcanoes. His fire-controlling techniques were also comprehended from the eruptions of volcanoes. Although the magma that erupted from volcanic eruptions was not earth fire, there were many similarities. Come to think of it, both were actually brewed from the earth. However, one was earth fire, while the other was open flame. One was invisible and intangible, while the other was clear in form and quality. One was low-key and restrained, while the other was high-profile and domineering. Although the external appearance was different, the essence was the same. Therefore, Lin Feng was able to control earth fire more easily than ordinary flames, and the effect of his fire control skills could be maximized. Triple explosion. With a thought, he released his mind power. As soon as he came into contact with the flames, he felt as if he had returned to his hometown, and a sense of familiarity hit him in the face. The next moment, triple explosion. Boom. 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 A deafening sound suddenly came from the furnace, and the originally incomparably violent and blazing earth fire suddenly grew rapidly. With 3 consecutive explosions, the flames grew to a level that made people's hearts palpitate, as if it had transformed from one height to another. Even though they were far away, the surrounding people still felt a trace of fear and smelled a trace of danger. Buzz, buzz, buzz. The violent flames were like thunder, scuttling about in the furnace, emitting a chilling aura. The entire furnace seemed to be unable to trap it, and gently swayed in place, as if it could break free at any time. The surrounding core disciples were shocked, and subconsciously retreated a few steps, not even caring about their refining tools. From this, it could be seen how terrifying an earth fire that had undergone a second transformation was. After reacting, they could not help but blush, but their gazes towards Lin Feng were filled with shock and fear. What a terrifying fire control skill! I'm afraid that even the Peak Lord does not have such means. This earth fire seems to have undergone a huge change. Who is he? How can he have such a terrifying fire control skill? Why haven't I seen it before? There are not many core disciples in the first place, and we all know each other. This kid is so unfamiliar, it should be the first time we've seen him. Could he be a new core disciple? In recent days, there has only been one new core disciple. You mean, he is Linfeng, the opponent of the alchemy peak's Eljuashin Duo Kun. Although I've never seen him before, I've heard that his prestige in the inner and outer circle is extremely high. Even senior brother Nan Yang is far from him. At first, I thought that he was just lucky and his strength was barely passable. But now, it seems that his refining ability is not inferior to his strength at all. How is that possible? I've heard that even the Peak Lord admitted that he is not as good as him. Let's not talk about his ability to distinguish materials, since we've never seen it with our own eyes. But his fire control skill is definitely at the peak of perfection. In the entire Shuntian sect, no one can compare to him. I'm afraid that even those Peak Earth Saint Great Circle old monsters might not be able to surpass him by much. In the past, I've always been dissatisfied with him. How can a newbie have such prestige? How can he be called the #1 genius of the crafting peak? But now I'm convinced. The core disciples guessed Linfeng's identity in just a few words. As for their original thoughts, they had quietly changed. In just 3 breaths, he was able to activate the earth fire to such an extent. They admitted that they could not do it, and had never even heard of such a thing. This Linfeng did have some ability, and his reputation was not undeserved. While they were communicating through telepathy, Linfeng had already quietly removed the hidden restlessness of the underground fire, making it as docile as a sheep and as harmless as a rabbit. Amazing! Everyone was sincerely convinced by this. After completing the first step, Linfeng placed the materials into the furnace, sat down cross-legged, and closed his eyes. Perfect-grade materials were extremely difficult to refine, and the impurities were also extremely difficult to remove. Ordinary perfect-grade materials would require at least 10 days to remove the impurities. The more precious a perfect-grade material was, the longer it would take, and the harder it would be to remove the impurities. Some impurities could not be removed at all, and special methods were needed to remove them. For example, the materials from the Nian beast were all top-grade perfect-grade materials. They could be said to be the best materials in the world, and could be used to refine top-grade 9th Revolution Saint tools. If such materials were to be burned with ordinary earth fire, even 100 million years would not be able to remove the impurities. Perfect-grade materials were also divided into 3 grades: mortal grade, earth grade, and heaven grade. The materials from the Nian beast were of the heaven grade. It was also because of this that the appearance of the Nian beast caused such a commotion. Even Peak Earth Saint Great Circle experts were scrambling for it. Although he was sitting cross-legged on the ground, Linfeng's mental strength was controlling the flames and materials. After the transformation of the earth fire, the time needed to remove the impurities was greatly reduced. However, this was not something that could be done in a short period of time. Linfeng estimated that based on the current progress, it would take about 3 days to complete the gathering and dispersing process. The people around him all stopped refining, and their gazes fell on Linfeng and the furnace beside him. They were very curious. Would Linfeng, who had a terrifying ability to identify materials and control fire, be able to perfectly integrate the precepts into his techniques? They were looking forward to seeing how far Linfeng could go. At the peak of Gold Refinement Peak, Junior Brother Duo Kun, I just received news that the new core disciple of Weapon Refinement Peak, Linfeng, has come out of seclusion. A young man with a golden pattern embroidered on his shirt hurriedly knocked on Juashin Duo Kun's door and said as soon as he entered. A cold murderous intent flashed across Juashin Duo Kun's eyes. This murderous intent disappeared in a flash, and in the next moment, it returned to normal. He slowly stood up and said calmly, "Linfeng, your time has come." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned and walked out of the door. When he passed by the young man, he said calmly, "Thank you, Senior Brother Tong Guan. I will remember this." Although there was no promise, This sentence made the young man who came to deliver the news overjoyed and excited. After a while, Erjueshin Duo Kuan led a few core disciples of Weapon Refinement Peak and set off for Weapon Refinement Peak. The other senior brothers and sisters rushed to Weapon Refinement Peak as soon as they received the news. How could they miss out on such a lively event? Elsewhere, Fair Maiden Peak. Jing Ting also received the news, and a trace of worry flashed across her eyes. She did not have time to report to Yunhua and hurriedly rushed to Weapon Refinement Peak. Along the way, she met a few sisters of Fair Maiden Peak, and they set off together. Potion Peak, Battle-Crazed Peak, Array Peak. The news of Linfeng coming out of seclusion and Erjueshin Duo Kuan bringing people to Weapon Refinement Peak spread to the ears of countless people in the blink of an eye. Among them, Yen Luo, Wu Shen, and Yun Zhongzi were the most concerned about Linfeng. After receiving the news, a large number of core disciples rushed to Weapon Refinement Peak, afraid that they would miss out on the most exciting scene. In the sky above the various main peaks of Shuntian sect, there was a group of people flying in the same direction. The scene was extremely spectacular. If Linfeng knew that the news of him coming out of seclusion had caused such a huge commotion, who knew if he would feel proud or helpless? However, it was obvious that he did not expect all of this. Chapter 473. Bright Moon House, Crafting Pavilion. Lin Feng's movements gradually attracted the attention of more people. The crafting pavilion, which was usually bustling with noise, was quiet today. Only the buzzing sound of the burning flame could be heard. At some point, a group of core disciples had already left and surrounded Lin Feng. Although they didn't speak, they were conversing with each other through telepathy. Lin Feng's miraculous fire control skills shocked all the blacksmiths present. As disciples of the crafting peak, they naturally didn't lack refiners. Many of them were craftsmen saints. Although they were only at the bottom of the human rank, they were extremely noble existences. However, in front of Lin Feng's fire control, they had no choice but to lower their noble heads. The crafting pavilion was silent. Everyone's eyes were focused on Lin Feng. Time slowly passed. In the blink of an eye, an hour had passed. The 9 perfect grade materials were constantly having their impurities removed in the furnace. Little by little, the impurities accumulated. Although it hadn't been long, the 9 perfect grade materials were already sparkling and translucent. To be able to remove the impurities of 9 perfect grade materials at the same time. This level of control is far from mine. Some people who believed that their refining abilities were extraordinary couldn't help but sigh in admiration at the scene before them. Most people would put the materials one by one into the furnace to remove the impurities. After the impurities had been removed from the materials in front, it would be the turn of the next material. The advantage of doing this was that one could concentrate more on refining the materials and removing the impurities. The disadvantage was that it would take a lot more time. Even Earth-rank refiners wouldn't easily put several materials into the furnace at the same time. This was because it would take too much energy. Moreover, an accident could happen at any time. If the materials were ordinary, it would be fine if they failed. However, if the materials were precious and unique, it would be troublesome. Therefore, people as bold and confident as Lin Feng were few and far between. The key point was that although Lin Feng was bold, he did have the ability to control the situation. In an hour, there wasn't the slightest mistake. This was the reason why everyone was shocked. Everyone gathered around quietly, holding their breaths and concentrating, afraid that they would disturb Lin Feng. However, there were people among them who were familiar with Mo Zhu. They had already informed Mo Zhu of the situation here through voice transmission. Outside, when Mo Zhu heard the message from the voice transmission jade slip, she instantly frowned, and a wisp of anger appeared on her beautiful face. "There's actually a blind guy who dares to take my seat. Mo Zhu circled around in the air, and suddenly accelerated, flying towards the bright moon house at an extremely fast speed. In a short while, she arrived at Bright Moon House's refining pavilion. Walking into the crafting pavilion, she was about to say, "Which brat took my seat? Come out now." However, before she could say anything, the strange atmosphere in the crafting pavilion made her swallow her words. Her gaze fell on the group of core disciples. Why were these people crowding around her personal territory? With a trace of doubt in her eyes, she walked over without batting an eyelid. What was strange was that the group of core disciples were so focused that they did not notice her arrival at all. If it was in the past, when they saw her, they would definitely retreat to avoid provoking her. However, at this moment, no one noticed her. It seemed that there was some treasure in the center of the crowd that attracted their attention. Feeling more and more puzzled, Mo Zhu walked behind the crowd and stood on her tiptoes, her gaze falling on Linfeng, who was in the center of the crowd. "Is this the guy who took my seat?" She did not see anything extraordinary about Linfeng. Whether it was his temperament, appearance, or aura, there was nothing special about him. She could not figure out why everyone was crowding around here. "Wait, that is..." Her expression suddenly became startled, her gaze falling on the flame in the furnace. What a blazing flame! It's definitely not comparable to the earth fire. It's too frightening. That flame actually makes me feel threatened. With her strength of the early 5th stage of the earth realm, she actually felt threatened by the flame in the furnace. She could not imagine how frightening that flame was. How did he do it? The crafting pavilion was filled with invisible earth fire. She was naturally aware of this, but she did not know what method that ordinary young man used to make the earth fire grow to such a frightening level. If this flame was used in a battle, she was afraid that even a cultivator of the intermediate 5th stage of the earth realm would suffer a great loss. After noticing the flame, she naturally noticed the 9 perfect grade materials that were constantly being forced out of the flame. Mo Zhu's pupils suddenly shrank, calcining 9 perfect grade materials at the same time. She could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. Hiss! When she looked at Linfeng again, her gaze had already changed. Her face was a little pale, and her confidence had been greatly damaged. She had always thought that she was the most outstanding person besides the Peak Master, Great Elder, and Chief Disciple of the Weapon Refining Peak. Whether it was weapon refining or strength, her results were outstanding. Even in the Alchemy Peak, she would be one of the top geniuses. She had always believed that she would become the 4th Earth-grade weapon refiner of the Weapon Refining Peak. Other than the few monsters that could be counted with one's fingers, she believed that she was not weaker than anyone else. Even for those monsters, she did not think that she was too far behind. At most, those people had lived longer than her and relied on their long lifespans to surpass her. But now, her confidence had been shattered. Compared to this ordinary young man, she was thousands of miles away. The difference in her ability to control fire was not less than 10 times. The difference in her ability to control materials and timing was also not less than 10 times. Senior Sister Mo Zhu. At this time, someone finally noticed Mo Zhu's arrival, and a somewhat frightened voice was heard. The rest of the people were shocked and immediately bowed respectfully. "Greetings, Senior Sister Mo Zhu." Mo Zhu's expression immediately returned to normal, and she calmly asked, "Who is this person?" Everyone thought that she would scold them and did not expect her to ask such a question. But after thinking about it carefully, they immediately understood. He is Linfeng, the new core disciple of the Crafting Peak. Senior Sister Mo Zhu, you should have heard of him before. A female core disciple who was closer to Mo Zhu replied. Hearing this, Mo Zhu's gaze once again fell on Linfeng. He is Linfeng? The young man in front of her was very different from the arrogant, insolent, and sensationalist image she had originally imagined. She could not help but feel a little dazed. No wonder the peak leader said that he is the hope of the crafting peak and told me not to bully him. Mo Zhu recalled the words that the peak leader, Xie Xiaofeng, purposely told her. At that time, she did not take it seriously and thought that Xie Xiaofeng was exaggerating. But now it seems that this young man was really something. Who knows, he might really be able to lead the crafting peak to greatness in the future. Even though I don't know if his abilities are as powerful as the rumors say, but I am certain that his crafting abilities are worthy of the peak leader's attention. She finally acknowledged Linfeng's identity. One of the core disciples suggested, "Since senior sister Mo Zhu is back, let's ask this young man to give up his position." Even though he did not really want to do this, in order to redeem himself and prevent Mo Zhu from causing trouble for them, he could only say this. Everyone else nodded. Obviously, even though they admired Linfeng and were shocked by Linfeng's abilities, they still succumbed to Mo Zhu's power. Hearing this, Mo Zhu raised an eyebrow and said, "No need." Pausing, she looked at Linfeng again and said, "Just let him use it. I am not in a hurry." Was she really not in a hurry? Obviously not. But firstly, the peak master Xie Xiaofeng had instructed her to not bully Linfeng. Secondly, she was very curious about how strong Linfeng's refining ability was, and whether or not he had reached the level of an Earth-grade armament master. Thirdly, she did not want to become enemies with Linfeng. The talent that Linfeng had displayed had completely exceeded her imagination. She had reason to believe that Linfeng would definitely have great achievements in the future, so she did not want to offend Linfeng. Everyone was shocked. Senior sister Mo Zhu, she had actually tacitly allowed Linfeng to use her special refining position. This was simply inconceivable. One must know that many years ago, the head core disciple, who was also the eldest senior brother Nanyang, had once asked Mo Zhu to borrow her position. In the end, he was rejected by Mo Zhu without any hesitation. Even though the two of them did not have a good relationship, they could still talk. However, Mo Zhu still rejected him. One could imagine how stubborn and overbearing Mo Zhu's personality was. Even when facing the head core disciple, she would not yield an inch. But now, she had tacitly allowed Linfeng to use her special refining position. How could they not be shocked? Mo Zhu did not pay attention to everyone's shock. Instead, she indifferently stared at Linfeng, at the flames in the furnace, and at the 9 perfect grade materials. Her beautiful eyes were filled with a strange light, but no one knew what she was thinking. It's good that senior sister Mo Zhu has agreed. Like this, can't we continue to watch junior brother Linfeng refine? The group of core disciples turned their heads and laughed, once again paying attention. After about the time it took for a stick of incense to burn, Mo Zhu suddenly frowned. She turned her head and looked outside the weapon refining pavilion. The rest of the core disciples also looked outside. Loud noises could be heard. Some people were quickly approaching the weapon refining pavilion, and their voices were loud and noisy. This was a taboo in the Bright Moon House. "You all stay here and guard. I'll go out and take a look." Mo Zhu's expression was cold as she dropped this sentence and walked outside. Everyone couldn't help but frown and ask doubtfully, "What's happening outside?" Although Mo Zhu had told them to stay here and not pay attention to what was happening outside, how could they just ignore it? After thinking about it, they finally decided to go out and take a look. Just as they reached the door, an unusually domineering voice entered their ears. "Is Linfeng inside? Tell him to come out." The one who spoke was a young man with a dark expression. There were 2 people standing on his left and right, and behind him were also several people. "Earl Jueshin Duokun, I just said that junior brother Linfeng will not accept your life or death challenge. You should go back." The one who spoke was Lu Hu. He had stopped Earl Jueshin Duokun all the way here. It was not that he didn't want to stop Earl Jueshin Duokun, but that he didn't have the strength to stop him. This is where the Bright Moon House refines weapons. Outsiders are not allowed to disturb it. Please don't go too far. Sun Yu's expression was also dark as he said, You are not welcome here. Please leave. Chapter 475. Scram, Eljueshin said. Duo Koen said calmly, If you don't scram, don't blame me for taking action. Lu Hu and Sun Yu were enraged. Before they could say anything, Eljueshin had already started. Duo Koen lost his patience and sent a slap over. Bang! Bang! Lu Hu and Sun Yu were unable to resist at all. They were sent flying in an instant and landed on the ground in the distance. With a wah sound, they spat out a large mouthful of blood. Their complexions became incomparably pale. It was obvious that they had suffered heavy injuries. Seeing this, the core disciples of the weapon crafting peak were enraged. The hot-tempered ones stepped forward and were ready to attack. However, Emo Zhu spoke up. She said coldly, You're Eljueshin? Duo Korn? I'm here for Linfeng. If you don't want to get hurt, don't provoke me. Duo Koen did not care about Emo Zhu at all and said calmly. Emo Zhu's face darkened. I don't care what grudges you have with Linfeng. Scram now. You shouldn't be here. If you want to cause trouble, go back to Alchemy Peak. You're not welcome here. Eljueshin? Duo Koen's eyes narrowed as a dangerous glint appeared in his eyes. He smiled faintly. What if I say no? If you don't scram, I'll beat you until you scram. Emo Zhu did not back down. The atmosphere became tense and a fight was about to break out. Ah, Eljueshin? Duo Koen laughed. Who do you think you are? Even if it's Alchemy Peak, I, Eljueshin, can do anything. I can come and go as I please. Who can stop me? I'll leave if you ask me to. Why should I listen to you? Don't use your weapon Refining Peak's power on me. His tone turned cold. Let me tell you, I, Eljueshin? But Duo Koen won't fall for it. The disciples of Weapon Refining Peak were furious. Senior Emo Zhu, let's do it. Teach him a lesson. If we don't teach him a lesson, he won't know his place. Our Weapon Refining Peak has never been afraid of anyone. If you want to fight, then let's fight. It just so happens that I have long disliked the people of Alchemy Peak. Although the core disciples were not divided into their own peaks, and all of them were under the command of the Grand Elders and the Sect Master, they were still the core disciples of the various peak. From the moment they entered the Shuntian sect, they were branded with the label of their own peak. Thus, even though they had become core disciples, they were still very concerned about the glory of their respective peak. To them, Weapon Crafting Peak was their roots. Eljueshin? Duo Koen wasn't afraid at all. Facing the many core disciples of the Crafting Peak, there were Earth Stage 4 and Earth Stage 5, but he didn't put them in his eyes at all. He said arrogantly, Don't you want to fight? Then let's go. My Earl Juetchen? If Duo Koen takes a step back, he will lose and never step into your Crafting Peak again. Ah, you're pissing me off. A core disciple at the late stage of the fourth stage of the Earth realm angrily rushed forward. White Eel, stop. Emo Zhu suppressed her anger and said, Come back. Senior Sister Emo Zhu, this person is too despicable. I must teach him a lesson today. That core disciple clenched his fists tightly, unwilling to give up. Emo Zhu's expression turned cold. Come back. Don't make me say it a second time. Perhaps because Emo Zhu's prestige was too great, this core disciple could only glare at Eljueshin hatefully despite his unwillingness. Duo Koen glanced at him and slowly walked back. When he returned behind Emo Zhu took a deep breath and looked at Eljueshin. Duo Koen said, Rumor has it that you once heavily injured a core disciple at the early stage of the fifth stage of the Earth stage. I, Emo Zhu, am also a core disciple at the early stage of the fifth stage of the Earth stage. I would like to see what you're capable of. Her cold expression had a trace of seriousness as she took up a stance. Come, let me see if you're really as powerful as the rumors say. You? Eljazin? Duo Kun shook his head in disdain. You won't be able to. All of you together will barely have the qualifications to force me to use my blade. Emoju's expression was extremely gloomy. You don't have the final say. We'll know after we fight. Hearing this, Eljazin? Duo Kun said with interest, Fine, I'll play with you. I hope that Lin Feng won't be scared off after he sees my strength. He took the opportunity to mock her and stood with his hands behind his back. Let's fight. I'll let you have 3 moves first, so that the world won't laugh at me for bullying a weak girl. The core disciples of the weapon refining peak stared at Eljazin. Duo Kun's gaze was murderous and did not hide the hatred in his eyes. The core disciples of the metal refining peak were expressionless, but their eyes flashed with a trace of gloating and mockery. Night Veil. Emoju's face was frosty. She was no longer interested in arguing. The moment she attacked, she used a powerful law technique. A law technique comprehended from the fusion of the law of night and the law of darkness. Grade: low-level upper tier. Eljazin? Duo Kun was slightly surprised. Not bad, interesting. However, if she wanted to hurt him, she was still far from it. With his hands behind his back, he stepped lightly on the ground and instantly broke through the black light screen. One move. He softly spat out 2 words. Emoju scoffed. Although she hated this person, she had to admit that he was really strong. He was stronger than the rumors said. However, it was impossible for her to admit defeat just like that. Even if she died in battle, she would not admit defeat. Midnight of Despair. This was Emoju's strongest law technique. Grade: low-level middle tier. Eljazin? Duo Kun's expression became a little more serious. However, that was all. He let out a light shout as a bright light suddenly erupted from his eyes. Suddenly, he let out a violent roar as the dense power of laws and origin energy erupted simultaneously. In an instant, he broke through the terrifying darkness that caused one to sink into despair and be unable to extricate themselves from it. The moment he broke through the darkness, his body flashed and appeared in front of Emoju. He said, "You've lost." Yes, he did not even make a move and Emoju had lost. "I've lost." Emoju looked as if all the blood in her body had been sucked out. Her face was pale and miserable. The core disciples of the weapon refining peak stared blankly at the scene. They could not believe it and could not accept it. Senior apprentice Sister Black Bamboo had lost. The second strongest core disciple of the crafting peak, second only to the first core disciple, Nanyang, had been defeated so easily. She had not even been able to last 3 moves against her opponent. The law technique that she relied on to survive had not even been able to touch the corner of her opponent's clothes. She had lost too badly. She has already lost. What about you guys? Eljuexian asked. Duo Kun glanced at the core disciples of the weapon refining peak. I said that I don't mind you guys coming together. Anyway, no matter how many of you come, you're just ants. Just as the core disciples of the weapon refining peak were about to break down and explode, a roar came from afar. Eljazin? Duo Kun, don't be too arrogant. Do you really think that no one in the weapon refining peak can stop you? What followed was a blinding blade light. Eljazin? Duo Kun suddenly felt a sense of danger. He tried his best to escape. It's eldest senior brother. Eldest senior brother is here. Ha, ha. Senior Nanyang is out. Senior Nanyang is here. Let's see how arrogant this guy can be. Senior Nanyang, please teach him a lesson. At this moment, a figure descended from the sky. He looked like a deity. Eljazin? Duo Kun stood still and looked at the person coldly. I was wondering who it was. So it's the head disciple of the weapon refining peak, Senior Nanyang. However, Senior Nanyang, do you really think that you can stop me alone? You can try. Nanyang said indifferently. Don't worry. I have the same intention. I won't disappoint Senior Nanyang. Eljazin? Duo Kun took a deep breath and revealed a cruel smile. He slowly placed his right hand on the hilt of the saber at his waist. This saber is a 5th Revolution Saint weapon called the Tiger Soul Saber. Once it is unleashed, its power is unparalleled. If Senior Brother Nanyang can block my saber, then I, El Urjueshin, won't be able to do anything. If Eljazin is able to block it, Duo Kun will turn around and leave. Nanyang's expression was serious. Then let me see what you're capable of. Eljazin? Duo Kun's strength was similar to Nanyang's. However, with the Tiger Soul Blade, his strength increased tremendously. Even rank 5 Earth Realm experts could not defeat him. Aurora! Without any warning, Eljazin attacked. Duo Kun moved. At that moment, everyone could only see a flash of white light. They could not see what he was doing. The law of speed, the law of light, and the law of explosion, which had an extremely explosive force. The combination of the three, together with the terrifying combat strength amplified by the Tiger Soul Saber, caused his attacks to be extremely fast and powerful. Furthermore, the explosive force was extremely strong. Even if he was prepared beforehand, he still couldn't block it in time. Boom! In the next moment, when Eljazin stopped, Duo Kun stopped. Duo Kun stopped. Everyone's gaze landed on a figure in the distance who was like a kite with a broken string. 1 slash. The head disciple of the Weapon Refining Peak, the number 1 of the core disciples of the Weapon Refining Peak, a rank 5 Earth Realm expert, was sent flying with 1 slash and was severely injured. They looked at Eljazin. Duo Kun's eyes were filled with shock. Was this the true power of the number 1 prodigy of the Weapon Refining Peak? His power was comparable to a rank 5 Earth Realm expert. How terrifying! The core disciples of the Weapon Refining Peak felt a chill in their hearts. They could not help but feel fear in their eyes. Even Senior Sister Mo Zhu and Senior Brother Nanyang could not defeat him. Even if all of them, rank 4 Earth Realm experts, were to attack him together, they would only be sending themselves to him. The difference was too great. When they thought about that, they could not help but feel sad. Had the Weapon Refining Peak really fallen to the point where a core disciple of the Weapon Refining Peak could do as he wished? Was there really no one else in the entire Weapon Refining Peak who could stop him from advancing? I have let down the Weapon Refining Peak. I have not shouldered the responsibility of being the head disciple of the Weapon Refining Peak. Nanyang clenched his fists so tightly that his sharp nails pierced into his palms. However, the pain could not get rid of the guilt, self-blame, and pain in his heart. Chapter 476. The morale of all the core disciples in the Crafting Peak collapsed. A tragic atmosphere filled the air. In the past, while the Crafting Peak had declined, at least no one dared to bully the main peak. In fact, they were defeated one by one. Even the strongest of the Crafting Peak was no match for them. Only now did they feel the suffocating despair. Let's fight it out with him. Didn't he want a battle to the death? I, Zhang Yong, accept it. Even if I die, I'll bite off a piece of his bone. There are no cowards in the Crafting Peak. I'd rather die standing than live kneeling. The core disciples of the Crafting Peak were furious. Their heroic spirit infected everyone present. Eljuashin Du Kuan sneered, "Battle to the death? You guys? Don't say that I look down on you. With your abilities, you don't even have the right to battle to the death with me. I'm sorry, but I refuse." Hearing this, the core disciples of the Crafting Peak were so angry that they vomited blood. These words were more vicious than anything else. It was an insult to the Crafting Peak. Where's Lin Feng? He hasn't appeared after so long. Don't tell me he saw how powerful I am and decided to hide like a coward? Earl Juashin Doken mocked. You guys better get lost. I only want to find Lin Feng. If you guys insist on blocking my path, Don't blame me for being merciless and disregarding our friendship. The core disciples of the crafting peak were so angry that their faces turned green. They clenched their fists and prepared to fight to the death with El Jueshin Du Kuan. However, a cold voice stopped them. Who are you to judge Lin Feng? As soon as he finished speaking, a beautiful woman in a fluttering white robe slowly landed in the distance. Behind her were several beautiful women who walked over together. With a single step, they were already several feet away. In a few steps, they were already in front of El Jueshin Du Kuan. It's you. El Jueshin Du Kuan raised an eyebrow and looked at the woman. Are you here to protect Lin Feng, that trash? Protect? The woman shook her head. Her voice was cold. He doesn't need my protection because you can't hurt him. Earl Jueshin Doken snorted and said, Lin Feng is really lucky. So many people are willing to die for him. The woman didn't want to get entangled in this matter and said indifferently, You can leave. I won't leave until I see Lin Feng. Although Earl Jueshin Doken was a little afraid, he was not scared away. I admit that you are very strong, but you may not be my match. Hearing this, the woman was too lazy to argue. Instead, she said, You can stay, but don't touch a single blade of grass or tree in the crafting peak. Miss Jing. Mo Zhu couldn't help but frown as she called out. The woman shook her head and said, This matter needs to be resolved by Lin Feng himself. Whether he accepts or rejects the death match, it's his business. We have no right to interfere. Her voice softened a little. Besides, I believe that Lin Feng has the ability to solve this problem. He has never disappointed anyone. You should have more confidence in him. Earl Jueshin Doken looked at the woman in surprise and sneered. You said it yourself. When the time comes, don't interfere. I said that no matter what Lin Feng chooses, I won't interfere. The woman's voice became cold again. However, Lin Feng is currently crafting weapons. Before he finishes, no one can touch him. If you dare to touch him, I don't mind fighting with you. Such domineering words came out of the mouth of an extremely gentle person. It was very rare. Hearing this, anger appeared on Earl Jueshin Doken's face. However, when he thought of Yi Changtian's instructions, he had to endure it. His gaze paused on the soft sword on the woman's back. His eyes flashed. This sword should be the Phoenix Dance Ninth Heaven that Peak Master mentioned. His expression was very serious. This is a 6th transformation sacred weapon that is 1 grade higher than my Tiger Soul Saber. I don't know if Yun Hua has gone senile to give this sword to her. Not to mention that Jing Ting was a late-stage Earth Level 5 expert, even if she was only a mid-stage Earth Level 5 expert. With this sword, Earl Jueshin Doken might not be her match. He took a deep look at Jing Ting and said, All right, I promise you. Putting away the Tiger Soul Saber, he mocked in disdain. I don't believe that Lin Feng is going to hide in the weapon refining pavilion forever. The few core disciples of Fair Maiden Peak who followed Jing Ting could not help but admire her. Junior sister Jing is so powerful. She managed to subdue this arrogant person with just a few words. This had never happened before. After all, Earl Jueshin Doken was the #1 core disciple of Alchemy Peak and one of the 4 geniuses of Shuntian Prefecture. He was very famous and powerful. Thank you for your help, Miss Jing. Mo Zhu and Nan Yang cupped their hands. The rest of the core disciples of Weapon Refining Peak also cupped their hands. Thank you, Miss Jing. Jing Ting's frosty face seemed to have thawed. A gentle smile appeared on her face. She said, I should be the one thanking you. If not for all of you, Lin Feng would have been disturbed while he was refining. You disregarded your own safety and helped Lin Feng fend off the enemy outside the weapon refining pavilion. I Jing Ting, thank you all. The core disciples of Weapon Refining Peak said that they did not dare. I will go in and take a look at Lin Feng first. I will have to trouble all of you to guard outside for a while. Jing Ting smiled. Mo Zhu turned her head and said, Bai Yu, lead them and guard outside. Other than the people of Weapon Refining Peak, no one is allowed to enter. The hot-tempered female core disciple said, Yes, Senior Sister Mo Zhu. After a series of twists and turns, Weapon Refining Peak's last shred of dignity was saved. Although Jing Ting was from Fair Maiden Peak, she was still Linfeng's woman in name. Therefore, in the eyes of the core disciples of Weapon Refining Peak, the credit should still be given to Linfeng. At that moment, their view of Linfeng became much more complicated. Today's disaster was caused by Linfeng and ended because of Linfeng's woman. They did not know whether to blame Linfeng or thank Linfeng. However, today's incident was a wake-up call for them. The overall strength of Weapon Refining Peak was too weak. El Jueshin Duo Kuan alone was enough to render them helpless and unstoppable. This showed how big the gap between the two peaks was. This deeply stimulated them and made them decide to work harder to improve their strength. Otherwise, today's humiliation would happen again sooner or later. After entering the Weapon Refining Pavilion, Jing Ting's gaze fell on the only person in the pavilion who was sitting cross-legged. Her thin eyelashes trembled slightly, and her gaze was somewhat infatuated. This Linfeng, I don't know what kind of incense he burned in his previous life to be able to win the heart of such an outstanding woman. Mo Zhu, Nanyang, and the other core disciples all sighed in their hearts. The woman beside Jing Ting blinked her eyes curiously and sized up Linfeng. This guy is Linfeng? He doesn't look outstanding in any way. Why would junior sister Jing be so infatuated with such an ordinary person? Although they had heard some rumors about Linfeng, they knew that the rumors were usually exaggerated and not true. They believed that Linfeng did have some tricks up his sleeve, but he was definitely not as powerful as the rumors said. Junior sister Jing, should we wake him up? A core disciple of Fair Maiden Peak asked. Jing Ting shook her head lightly. Let's wait. Don't disturb him. After saying that, her gentle gaze stopped on Linfeng and did not move for a long time. The Weapon Refining Pavilion was quiet. Everyone stared at Linfeng and waited silently. The sound of materials being burned in the furnace became the only sound in the Weapon Refining Pavilion. Linfeng closed his eyes, his expression focused and serious. He used his mental power to control the flames and the materials, removing the impurities in the materials bit by bit. Time passed quickly. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. When all the impurities were removed and there were no more impurities to be removed, it was already 3 days later. The core disciples of Weapon Refining Peak watched for 3 days and 3 nights. They kept watch for 3 days and 3 nights. Earl Jueshin Duo Kun and the group of Alchemy Peak disciples he brought with him sat cross-legged outside and waited for 3 days and 3 nights. They did not show any signs of impatience. Clearly, they were mentally prepared for a long battle. Other than Earl Jueshin Duo Kun and the rest, there were also many Outer Peak disciples. The Elixir Peak disciples led by Yen Luo, the Array Peak disciples led by Huishen, the Battle-Crazed Peak disciples led by Yun Zhongtian, and the other main peak's core disciples were different from Earl Jueshin Duo Kun. They were not here to cause trouble, but purely to watch the show. Or perhaps they were curious about the final outcome of the matter between Linfeng and Earl Jueshin Duo Kun. At this time, they were all standing quietly in the Weapon Refining Pavilion, their gazes focused on Linfeng. Clearly, Jing Ting, Nanyang, Mo Zhu, and the rest did not stop these core disciples from entering the Weapon Refining Pavilion. Weapon Refining Peak and Alchemy Peak were already on opposite sides. They could not afford to offend these people. Otherwise, the future of Weapon Refining Peak would be even more difficult. Because of this consideration and the fact that the other party was not here to cause trouble, Nanyang and the rest agreed to let them enter the Weapon Refining Pavilion. Who would have thought that the genius who caused such a commotion in the Shuntian sect's core disciples would look so ordinary? I really want to see what kind of ability he has to be able to stir up such a storm in the Shantian sect. Since he dares to be so high profile, he must have some tricks up his sleeve. Maybe he really can contend with Earl Jueshin Duo-kun. I hope he doesn't disappoint us. Everyone looked at Lin Feng quietly, but they all had different thoughts. Phew! Lin Feng let out a long breath and slowly stood up. His gaze was fixed on the furnace, and he did not pay attention to the existence of the people around him. His mind was completely focused on the refining process, and he could not spare a single bit of attention. The 9 sets of perfect-grade materials became sparkling and translucent, merging into one. Within it there was a strange radiance that circulated. Although he knew that the impurities had not been completely removed, being able to remove so much was already his limit. Thus, he very rationally stopped and prepared to start forging, perfectly fusing the law of space into it. Could it be that I have to give up on the law of mixture and replace it with the law of space? A thought flashed through Lin Feng's mind. The law of mixture is very inclusive, and the difficulty of fusing it into a technique is relatively low. If I were to replace it with the law of space, the difficulty would be at least 10 times higher. However, my foundational techniques are incomparably solid. The 100 casting, 1000 casting, and 10,000 casting have already broken through the surface and reached the essence. Thus, to me, fusing the law of space is not difficult at all. It's just a change of form. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.